Chapter 420. She absolutely wouldn't allow Yi Jifan and his family to just casually move their hands and make her live like a street rat once again. She had to change the situation with her own hands. The serious Yi Qian, the fearless Yi Qian, the hardworking Yi Qian, the sly, smart, and grateful Yi Qian. This was his little fox, a little fox who relied on her own hands to win hope. Xia Jinyuan smiled, his deep gaze fixed on the little fox who relied on her own hard work. Looking at those clear and stubborn eyes, he gently stroked them with his slender fingers. I really like your determination. It makes me very, very happy. If he wanted to get close to her, he had to know what she liked. His little fox liked challenges, liked the military, and he would personally present all of her likes to her. Of course, what he wanted was not just to make her smile, but his gaze narrowed slightly. When he looked at Yi Qian, it was as if there was a huge beast hibernating in the depths of his eyes. What he wanted was to win the girl's heart. As a 23-year-old, he fell in love with a 16-year-old high school student. At least before he met his little fox, he would never have thought that he would be so patient as to wait for a girl to grow up. There was a dim light in his eyes, faintly discernible, like a halo, which made Yi Qian's heart skip a beat. I won't give up, Captain Xia. The opportunity was right in front of him, how could he give it up? I didn't ask you to give up. Come on, little fox, let's experience what extreme racing is like. Xia Jinyuan, who had retracted his hand, took the lead and walked to the left. Obviously, he was very familiar with this place. I trained here for 3 months and was injured 3 times. The most serious injury was here. Walking in front, he suddenly lifted up his shirt until his smooth waistline was completely exposed. Sexy, perfect, showing off a man's strength. However, Yi Qian could not see his sexiness in his eyes. She only saw a hideous scar on his waist. It was quite wide, and there were fine stitches around it. Yi Qian's pupils contracted slightly. She even held her breath as she looked at the hideous scar that seemed to belong to an Eastern dragon. If this injury is a little more serious, it will directly hurt the spine. Not to mention driving, even walking will be a problem. When he mentioned the dangers of the past, his tone was casual, as if it was nothing worth mentioning. Why did you build such a huge training ground only a few dozen kilometers away from the city instead of deep in the mountains? The reason is very simple. Once there is an accident, you can immediately send it to the hospital for treatment. By choosing it, Yi Qian, you have chosen to dance with death. I gave you a chance to give up, but since you followed me, there is no turning back. There is no choice for you to regret. His shirt was pulled down as he walked. His unique low voice mixed with the sound of the high-speed engine, like the evening drum and morning bell, penetrated Yi Qian's eardrums and went straight to the depths of her heart. Xia Jinyuan's handsome face was cold, and even his eyebrows were stern. When Yi Qian first met him, even a slight movement of his eyebrows was enough to make people feel afraid. Sitting in a modified jeep, Yi Qian lowered her head and fastened her seatbelt. She met his gaze. I never change my mind easily. This is the Yi Qian that Captain Xia knows. Chapter 421. Xia Jinyuan started the car, pulled down the handbrake, and stepped on the gas pedal. Amidst his laughter, the car was like a ferocious beast that had been released from its cage, heading straight into the darkness. The training grounds you saw just now are not suitable for a newbie like you. Now, I'll take you to see a suitable training ground for you. Xia Jinyuan smiled amidst the rumbling of the car. His eyes were fixed on the front as he rushed out of the training ground with Yi Qian. He even took out a pistol from the car and gave it to her. Hold this. Shoot when you see a target. On the spectator stand, Lu Tuan was looking at the recorded results. He pointed at the results marked with a red pen and said in a deep voice, So far, only 12 people have a 100% passing rate. Are these the results you're showing me? Have you calculated how many months there are left before 12 people pass? Do you think that there are still a few more years and a lot of time for you to train? All you talk about is training every day. Where are the results? Where are the results? The political commissar was looking at another report form beside him. When he heard Lu Tuan's angry rebuke, he knew that he had vented all the anger he had suppressed for the entire night. He closed the file and gestured for the battalion commander who was criticized to leave. You're always so impatient. There's still time. Look at the results from September to the end of December. Combined with the time, I think they'll definitely pass. You're so angry the moment you come. No wonder sister-in-law doesn't like to come to the base at this time of the day. The political commissar was the only one who dared to provoke the regiment commander when he was angry. He took the report form from Lu Tuan and stuffed it into the hands of the soldiers who were not even out of breath. He smiled and said, "Let's go and take a look. Yi Qian, that little girl, really has the guts to come. I just saw Major Xia driving his old jeep to basement 1. They were at basement 3, and basement 1 was the base level. We'll go later. That girl is very smart and learns everything quickly. I'm afraid she'll have finished her apprenticeship by the end of December. Old Yen, go and take a look at the front. We'll strive for a 100% passing rate by the end of October." At the mention of Yi Qian, platoon leader Lu's angry face softened a little. He then mentioned the training. There will be a few leaders from the provincial military region coming over at the end of the month. If we don't get the results, we will be too ashamed to face them. Yi Qian was sitting in the front passenger seat. As the car came to a stop, the entire training ground fell into a dead silence again. The white lights illuminated the potholes on the ground, allowing her to see the black tire marks left on the ground by the friction between the wheels during the intense driving. Her heart was beating with a thump-thump-thump sound, one beat after another, following the rhythm of her breathing. However, her complexion was extremely bright, as if the sky was filled with peach blossoms, gorgeous and boundless. Xia Jinyuan was driving, and she was shooting. At over 300 kilometers per hour, she aimed at the targets that appeared out of nowhere and fired one shot after another. The beast-like jeep only stopped abruptly when the 15 blanks in the pistol were all used up. The sound of gunfire and the screeching of brakes mixed together to form a magnificent melody. It was exciting, nerve-wracking, and made the blood in her body boil. This was Yi Qian's first experience of training other than sniping. Xia Jinyuan looked at her and slowly curved his thin lips. From tomorrow night onwards, you can continue training until December. It's only September now, little fox, you have enough time to climb to another peak. Special Forces. Little fox, since you want to become a Special Forces soldier, then, you should start learning how to run underground from now on, then slowly learn how to fly in the sky. Chapter 422. Yi Qian didn't know about Xia Jinyuan's good intentions, but she knew that he admired her. She returned the gun in her hand, and the beautiful smile on her face faded as her heartbeat gradually calmed down. In an instant, the calm and indifferent Yi Qian appeared in front of her again. "I like it very much, Captain Xia. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Opportunities don't depend on others. You have to seize them yourself." Xia Jinyuan took the gun, which was still warm from her body heat. He put his hand on the steering wheel and put the gun back in its original position. The modified jeep had a special position, where the gun was placed. "Get out of the car. Let's see how high the hit rate is." The car door opened, and Xia Jinyuan got out of the car first. There was still a hint of coldness in his eyes, and he looked at Yi Qian with a sharp gaze. "I haven't seen you for more than a year. Let's see how much you've improved." If you don't improve, you'll fall behind. With Little Fox's ability, there was no such thing as falling behind. The car maintained a speed of 300 kilometers per hour. Standing beside the black and white circle, Xia Jinyuan raised his head slightly. His exquisite and handsome side profile was cold under the white light, and Yi Qian couldn't help but take a second look. After he saw the results, his smile spread from his eyebrows to his dark eyes. You fired 2 shots here. Both blanks hit the same spot. Interesting. Yi Qian looked at the results, raised his eyebrows, and asked, "How is it? Are you satisfied?" "Quite satisfied. I'm even surprised. I didn't expect Little Fox to be so good." He lowered his head, and his smiling black eyes were like ripples in the water. They contained a magical power that would make anyone who looked at him throw away all the impatience in their hearts. Surrounded by his gaze, Yi Jian's heart trembled slightly. This man's eyes were too seductive. If she wasn't paying attention, she would be distracted by them. She looked away in panic and said softly with dissatisfaction, "What do you mean by Little Fox? You sound so familiar." That one sentence was enough to calm Yi Jian down. After that, she immediately raised her head and looked at the man who was smiling. She said seriously, "Captain Xia, I'm not a fox. You don't have to be like this." After all, he was inexperienced and had never interacted with the opposite sex. Even though he had calmed down, his words still sounded immature. He had the instinct to be ruthless, but his words were still immature. These were 2 extremes that shouldn't be combined, but they were both present in Yi Qian. They blended together without any contradiction, creating a dazzling and gorgeous sight. He was like a blooming orchid. The more one looked at him, the more beautiful he was. The more one looked at him, the more one couldn't bear to part with him. Xia Jinyuan was like that. The more he looked, the more he felt that his taste was extraordinary. When he heard what Yi Qian said, he smiled and said, "Our focus is not on what you said, but..." He pointed at the targets that had not been checked yet. "Our focus is on these. There are still 13 bullets. Let's go see if the results are as outstanding." He took a step forward with his long legs and walked toward the next target. Yi Qian had no choice but to follow behind him. She felt every bullet that she fired. She didn't need to check to be sure that every bullet was as good as the one she fired. She maintained a distance that was neither too close nor too far. She was far away from the mint smell on his body, and she was able to speak calmly. Yi Qian thought that he was calm and collected, but he didn't know that Xia Jinyuan had already seen through him. Chapter 423. If he wanted to get close to Yi Qian, no matter how smart he was, there was nothing he could do. Even though the 16-year-old Yi Qian was older than Major Xia in both lifetimes, he had grown up in a different environment, so he still needed to be sharpened. A sniper trained by a world-class sniper is indeed very skilled. Even in the army, he would be a sharpshooter. After looking at the last target, Xia Jinyuan smiled and sighed. Every shot is like this. Yi Qian, when you go to the army, where do you think the male soldiers will be able to hide their faces? He was telling the truth, not exaggerating at all. If it were him today, he might not be able to shoot as well. 300 miles per hour, the wind, the power, the bullet speed, the trajectory of the target, all of these required precise calculations to shoot. He was very surprised. He could not imagine how she could shoot so accurately. Yi Qian bent down to pick up a bullet and looked at him with a faint smile. Intuition. My intuition has always been good, and it's the same for shooting. With calculations and intuition, I rarely miss. Xia Jinyuan was silent for a moment before he slowly said, "This is talent, and you didn't waste it. You allowed it to be used to its fullest potential." Little fox, you were born to hold a gun. On this path, you will walk faster than anyone else. Talent. Yi Qian lowered his head. His obsidian eyes were as cold as ice. How could it be talent? It was all the training she had received in her previous life that allowed her to have a foothold in this life. Can we go back now? It seems like a long time has passed. It was better to keep the knowledge of her rebirth to herself. It would be too shocking to say it out loud, so she did not even mention it to Grandpa Jen and Uncle Chin. Sensing the change in Yi Qian's expression, Xia Jinyuan immediately stopped talking. She was already resisting, so there was no need to continue. However, did I mention anything sensitive just now? No, he was sure that he did not. Then, why did Little Fox's mood suddenly change? Xia Jinyuan, who was puzzled, did not ask further. He looked at the time and said, "We've been here for 25 minutes. The training is not over yet, so we can watch for about half an hour. Their training will start at 10:30. If you come early, you can find a soldier to teach you." Yes, I'll have to trouble regiment commander and political commissar then. Yi Qian got into the car and thought of the 7-day holiday. He frowned and said, "It's a pity that we can't come on the 7-day holiday. Our school is organizing military training." The military training was not arranged in the school, and it was impossible for them to come out at night. They would not come for 7 days. It was a pity. The provincial first high school's response is very timely. They've arranged military training for Year 2 and Year 3 so quickly. Xia Jinyuan was naturally aware of the military training arrangements. The proposal to allow students to participate in the military training was actually on the agenda a few years ago, but it was only implemented this year. Seeing that she was not very willing to participate, Xia Jinyuan chuckled and said, "I don't have any holidays here, so I can't accompany you to practice driving. It's not a bad idea to go to military training. It's a good opportunity to destroy Yi Ying's prestige. Who needs him to accompany me?" Yi Qian thought to himself, but he said calmly, "There's nothing to destroy Yi Ying's prestige. She has a heart condition, so she can be exempted from military training with a leave request. I just think that it's not worth it to spend all 7 days on military training." It was not strange for him to know that she was in the same class as Yi Ying. He knew Uncle Chen and Principal Chow, so he just had to ask to know. Chapter 424. I really want to see you destroy her, but unfortunately, I can't accompany you during military training. If I was still in Fujian town, I could apply for it, but now that I'm not, there's no reason for me to apply. Xia Jinyuan, who saw through her thoughts, deliberately brought it up. Yi Qian didn't want to look at the back of his head. His skills had improved, and so had his temper. Xia Jinyuan didn't get angry. Instead, he chuckled until Yi Qian turned his head away. "Don't laugh, and don't say anything about accompanying me." He was always teasing her like this. Her heart skipped a beat, but he was calm. "Okay, I won't laugh, I won't laugh. I'll listen to whatever you say." A gentle smile, a low voice, and a pair of dark eyes that were as deep as the sea. Yi Jian glanced at him quickly and saw the burning light in his eyes. She sighed in her heart and thought to herself, "Composure, composure. Don't let this dangerous man ruin my composure." When he drove the car back, he saw the regiment commander and the political commissar standing next to the parking lot. They had their heads down and were talking about something. When they heard the sound of a car, they looked over and saw that Xia Jinyuan's car had returned. Lu Tuan suddenly spoke faster. "Old Yen, keep an eye on her later. Little Jian is smart. You have to make her interested first." "I can do it. You cast the line, and I'll set the bait. If necessary, we have to disturb Major Xia. Political Commissar Yen also spoke faster. He wanted to end the unfinished discussion before the two of them came over. Old Lu, we have to make the little girl take the initiative to ask where the car soldiers are going. Lu Tuan didn't understand. Seeing the two of them walking closer, he quickly asked, "Why do you have to do this? What's so good about it? You can't react. This is called dragging her down. The more you know, the deeper you fall. The little girl is a disciplined person. Once she knows more, she won't run away. She'll choose to face it." Lu Tuan patted his head and pretended to be afraid as he listened to his old partner speak. "I'm very lucky that we've always been partners and on the same side. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know if he had been tricked to death by his old partner." When they were about a meter away, Lu Tuan walked up to her with a smile and asked, "What do you think, Miss Jin? Isn't it spectacular?" There was a smile on his face, but there was a flicker of fire in his dignified eyes. "You have always liked challenging, difficult training. This is not bad, right? Do you like it? Why not give it a try? I think you can do it." Yi Jian did not dare to boast about this kind of thing. She was absolutely confident that she could win a sniping competition or mixed martial arts. But when it came to driving, she had only touched the steering wheel once tonight, even in both her lives. Furthermore, why did she feel that when she came over, the regiment commander and the political commissar seemed to have discovered a treasure? Their eyes were shining. She pursed her lips and said honestly, "I've really disappointed you. If it wasn't for Captain Xia, I wouldn't have touched the steering wheel. I can't be like the car soldiers here. They drive like they're walking. They can do whatever they want." This was the good thing about the little girl. She was honest. Lu Tuan laughed. His anger from the whole night seemed to have been extinguished by her. He said gently, "I'll give you a month. See if you can master it." As long as she was willing to work hard, she would definitely succeed. Chapter 425. Seeing that Yi Qian seemed to be thinking about it, he added, "The military training in your school will be conducted by our soldiers. You don't have to participate in the military training like standing at attention and singing military songs. As long as you can pass, I promise to bring you to a good place." Go to a good place. The National Day military training was indeed child's play for her. When Teacher Tong announced it, she wanted to apply for leave. Unfortunately, it would be recorded in the school records, so she could only give up. Now there was an opportunity to not participate, but Lu Tuan also mentioned his conditions. It would be a lie to say that she was not tempted. The military training was indeed a challenge for her. Lu Tuan's sharp eyes saw that Yi Qian was hesitating, so he added fuel to the fire. "And you definitely won't lose out. Regardless of whether you meet my requirements or not, don't you have to come every night? Even if you don't meet my requirements, you won't lose anything. At most, you will participate in the military training for 7 days and let the instructor invite you to be a model soldier for your classmates." Indeed, she wouldn't lose out if she didn't meet the requirements, but if she met the requirements, she would gain. Not only could she compete with the military soldiers, but she also didn't have to participate in the military training. No matter how she looked at it, it was a good thing. Seeing that there was some progress in this matter, Lu Tuan secretly gave a look to the smiling political commissar. Then, political commissar Yen, who was always good at persuading people, stepped forward. As expected of a political commissar who used to be an instructor, he was very focused on persuading people. He smiled and said, "Not much, just 7 days of leave. Once the 7 days are over, you can come back. Also, I promise that it will definitely not affect your military training results from being recorded in the school records. On the contrary, when you apply for the military academy, your political score will be higher." This moved Yi Qian, but Lu Tuan was a tiger who ate people without spitting out the bones. Political Commissar Yan, who was talking to him with a smile, was also a smiling tiger. Yi Qian's gaze fell on Xia Jinyuan, who was silent. He took a step back and gently touched Xia Jinyuan, who seemed to be thinking about something, and said softly, "Captain Xia, do you think I should agree?" For a regiment commander to say that he could bring the little fox out for a trip and even gain political points, this was no small matter. And little fox chose to let him be the one to check. Xia Jinyuan, who had gained her trust, gestured for her to calm down. He smiled and asked Lu Tuan, "You have always discussed things with the soldiers. We are not used to you suddenly discussing things with us. How about this, Lu Tuan?" Yi Qian doesn't know what you're talking about, nor does she know what level you need her to reach before she can go with you. Why don't you let her see what kind of level she needs to be before she can work for you? Lu Tuan glanced at Yi Qian, then looked at Xia Jinyuan. His eyes flickered, then he smiled and said, "Great, there's a chance. Major Xia, can you make a decision for Miss Jian? It's better to let Yi Qian make the decision herself. I'll help her check. It can't be helped. Lu Tuan, you're the Buddha in the unit. No one can escape from your control. Yi Qian is just a little girl. Look, you've only given her a little benefit, a benefit that she hasn't even tasted, and she's already believed you. I'm just helping her check and see what kind of level you want her to be at. Then I can make a rough judgment of what you want her to do." Xia Jinyuan was an expert and it came to beating around the bush with his superiors. He always had the initiative in his hands and would not easily let others lead him away from the topic. Chapter 426. Yi Qian laughed when he heard what he said. He really was a capable major. "No problem. Let's have an appetizer first. Let's show Miss Jian." After Lu Tuan finished speaking, he walked in front of a battalion commander and said a few words to him. The battalion commander nodded and replied with 3 simple words, "Okay, right away." Then, Yi Qian saw an inconspicuous car suddenly rush into his line of sight. He didn't know how the car soldiers inside did it, but the car that originally had 4 wheels on the ground suddenly had 2 wheels on the ground. At the same time, rows of bullets rained down from the back of the car. The bullets rained down, and after a few cracking sounds, several targets were directly broken in half. Is it possible to reach such a level? Lu Tuan, who had already walked over, said half-truthfully. His gaze fell on Yi Qian with a hint of anticipation. "If you can, I'll take you to a very good place. How about it? Do you want to give it a try?" Xia Jinyuan's expression was a little serious. What kind of place would require a young girl to go? Moreover, she had to have this level of driving skills. Regiment commander, political commissar, it's difficult to reach this level within a month. Also, it's too risky to let a young girl take such a big risk just to get some political points in the military academy. He was more worried that with this level of driving skills, the place she would go to might be a good place, but at the same time, it would be full of danger. Yi Qian also thought about it, but he didn't reject it immediately. Instead, he smiled and said, "Regiment commander, political commissar, may I know which organization these car soldiers will be sent to?" She didn't want to reject it, but she also wanted to know how dangerous it would be. She could only use where they would be sent to determine how dangerous it would be for her to make a decision. After all, the more capable a person was, the more likely they would be sent to a place. Her words made the smiles on Lu Tuan and political commissar Yan's faces fade a little. This girl was honest, but also smart. She was thinking of ways to get information out of them. They weren't afraid of her trying to get information out of them, but they were afraid that she wouldn't. The 2 tigers in the army secretly exchanged a look and revealed a meaningful smile. Jian Yiling was smart, but she couldn't resist the seduction of the two of them. Xia Jinyuan's expression also changed slightly. He even raised his hand to grab Yi Qian's shoulder and said in a low voice, "Little fox, you've crossed the line." And, as if he had thought of something, his eyes suddenly darkened. Regiment commander. He wanted to stop Xia Jinyuan, but to his surprise, Captain Lu acted quickly. He took a step forward and grabbed Xia Jinyuan's wrist. He laughed and said, "Captain Xia, don't touch a girl in front of us." While they were chatting, Political Commissar Yen chuckled and said something completely unrelated to the topic. "Have you watched the movie Bodyguard of Zhong Nanhai? It's not bad. You can watch it. It's very educational." He understood everything that he heard. Yi Qian also understood. His expression became serious and he immediately said, "I'm sorry, Captain Lu, Political Commissar. I said too much." After a slight pause, he said, "I will do my best to become a part of them." Captain Lu, who had deliberately sabotaged the conversation, laughed softly. He whispered to Xia Jinyuan, who wanted to stop him after realizing that he had done so, "It's too late, Major Xia. Political Commissar and I both know Major Xiao's ability. We can only make the first move." Chapter 427. Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows and smiled. He sighed and said, "No matter how capable I am, it's hard for me to fight against the trap set by the two leaders." Yi Qian still thinks that he knows too much and can't escape, but he doesn't know that this is all planned out by the two leaders. Lu Tuan, you and the Political Commissar are indeed a pair of tigers who eat people up without spitting out their bones. I'm impressed. You flatter me, you flatter me. Once you do something, you'll naturally get used to it. Why is Major Xia so protective of Yi Qian? Lu Tuan was in his early 40s and had a daughter who was about the same age as Yi Qian. He took care of Yi Qian like a father would. He patted Xia Jinyuan's shoulder and sighed. "I've heard about Sun Shuoqing's situation. Her mother was also a soldier in our team. Although I don't know how powerful martyr Sun Shuoqing was, I can tell from Yi Qian's performance that she's inheriting her mother's legacy. Perhaps she's even more outstanding than her mother. Our country's leaders are going abroad for an official visit during National Day. The political situation there is a little sensitive. The military has already considered Miss Jian going as the student representative. Her English is good and she's good at adapting. More importantly, she can protect herself and the leaders around her." During the meeting, Miss Jian's name was placed at the top of the list. "I can't tell you which leader is going, but I'm sure you know which country he's going to. So, it's not unreasonable for us to consider letting Miss Jian go. The military would know in advance if a leader was going abroad to promote an exchange between two countries." Xia Jinyuan was the same. Lu Tuan's words weren't considered a leak. Yi Qian was so serious that there was no expression on his face. He listened to the political commissar's instructions calmly. Since she agreed, everything would be easier to discuss. Political Commissar Yen said gently, "Don't be so nervous. The military already had this idea. There are some who agree and some who disagree. Lu Tuan and I hope you can agree. Not for others, but for myself. I know that you and Lu Tuan are taking care of me, and I will do my best to live up to your expectations. But if you only come here to train at night, I'm worried." Yi Qian's concern was not that he could not learn well, but that he did not have the time. As long as she made the decision, time was not a problem at all. Political Commissar Yen laughed and said, "We will arrange this. Tonight, you can ask Major Xia to send you back first. It's already past 12. Go back and rest early. If there wasn't enough time, the army would naturally come forward to solve it." There was no need for Yi Jian to worry at all. It is indeed a very good opportunity. I also wanted to accept it on your behalf. At that time, I thought too much about it. I didn't expect you to directly step into the pit dug by the two tigers. You can't climb out even if you want to. When they got into the car, Xia Jinyuan joked, I wanted to give you a hand, but Lu Tuan stopped me. Yi Qian rubbed his brows and smiled bitterly. Actually, after I asked, I knew that I had crossed the line. I also knew that I had fallen into a trap. But it is indeed an opportunity. At least I can have direct contact with the leader. It can also be considered as a bargaining chip for myself. He had already shown his face in front of the leader and completed the mission given by the military. In the future, no matter how powerful the people behind Yi Jifan were, he would have to think twice. Therefore, this was an opportunity that required him to gamble with his life. Chapter 428. Because of Yi Jifan. Xia Jinyuan immediately understood what she was referring to. He frowned and said, because of you. Yi Qian didn't want to think about this. She stared at the man who was focused on driving and interrupted him. Did it hurt? At that time. It was such a deep and wide scar. Even now, she could feel her back throbbing in pain just by looking at it. It didn't hurt at that time. I fainted. He brushed over the danger in a calm tone. At the red light, Xia Jinyuan stopped the car. He held the steering wheel elegantly with one hand and rested his other hand lazily on the window. When he saw her frown, he chuckled and said, I really don't remember it now. I don't feel the pain anymore. Why don't I tell you if it hurts the next time you get hurt? Yi Qian's expression changed and she spat, don't spout nonsense. Tui tui tui. A child's words carry no harm, a child's words carry no harm. A child's words carry no harm. Xia Jinyuan laughed heartily. His deep eyes glowed like a halo, which made Yi Qian's heart pound. She pursed her lips and looked away. She was conflicted, but her gaze was always attracted to him. Like a man of light, no matter how dangerous it was, he wouldn't want someone who had lived in the dark for too long to approach him. It was already 1:00 in the morning when they reached the back gate of the school. Xia Jinyuan stood under the streetlight and watched Yi Qian walk step by step towards the back gate of the school. He put his hands in his pockets and watched her enter the school. His smiling eyes gradually turned cold. Little Fox knew very well that the person she needed to be wary of was Yi Jifan. Since she knew this, it was the right thing for her to win the chips for him. His heart ached that she had to face someone like Yi Jifan at such a young age. Her life was much harder than her peers. Who was the person behind Yi Jifan? It seemed that he had to find out. The car drove very fast and flew directly to the hotel. Xia Jinyuan's phone had been vibrating several times. He didn't call back until he reached the hotel. Q King, when do you plan to return to the team after tomorrow's holiday? I'll be waiting for you in the capital. J5, who was wearing short sleeves and shorts, stood on the balcony of the military guest house with an unlit cigarette in his mouth. He teased, I heard someone talking about that little fox of yours in a meeting today. Not bad, even the leaders are paying attention to her. She has a bright future. Xia Jinyuan turned on the lights in the room and put his phone on speaker mode. As he took off his shirt, he said lazily, of course. This is the little fox that I have my eyes on. I even wanted to fight for her, but unfortunately, I have no place to show my talents. Are you being cocky? J5 couldn't stand it. His buddies were all single, and he was the only one who had his eyes on a high school student. Remember, our future is still in your hands. Don't just focus on your love life. Put our buddies aside. Everyone in the Snowfield Brigade knew that Q King had his eyes on a high school student named Yi Qian. Even Z7, who was a man of few words, said that she was a good girl. She was just a little young and was still in high school. But it was also fortunate that she was young. Otherwise, how could these 26-year-old old buddies endure it? They had to let Q King only think about her and not have any physical contact with her. Tell our buddies to wait. Wait for my revolution to succeed. After walking past the bathroom, Xia Jinyuan turned around. For the first time, he really paid attention to the wound on his lower back. The mirror clearly reflected the wound. It wasn't that bad, but little Fox seemed to be frightened. Chapter 429. After taking a look, he walked out of the bathroom and picked up a pair of short sleeves and shorts that could be used as pajamas. How many of you have arrived in Beijing tomorrow afternoon? 5 came, and the other 5 left in advance. September in Beijing was much colder than September in the south. Standing on the balcony and enjoying the night breeze, J5, who had not slept, felt even more sleepy. There's a layout meeting with Zongnanhai tomorrow night. You must come back. Xia Jinyuan, who was about to take a shower, turned on the shower. Amid the sound of running water, he said indifferently, "Okay, see you tomorrow afternoon." I'm hanging up. Wait, your little fox appeared in the meeting. Why didn't you ask? J5 asked before hanging up. Don't you care? Hey, hey, hey. Damn, he really hung up. Something was wrong. Why didn't he care? It didn't seem like the style of this wolf. There must be an inside story. There must be an inside story that he didn't know. Wait, just now, he heard the sound of running water. He picked up the phone very late, and then heard the sound of running water in the middle of the night. J5's expression suddenly became tense as if he had discovered something big. Did Q King already put his little fox on the bed? It shouldn't be, but he still felt uneasy. No, he had to find someone to talk to. He couldn't sleep tonight if he didn't. It was the after effects of working as an instructor. If he didn't understand everything, he would lose sleep. G3, who had already fallen asleep, didn't have any other reaction after being woken up. He directly threw J5, who hadn't slept in the middle of the night, into the corridor and closed the door to continue sleeping. Through the door, he heard J5's cold reply, "I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I rushed to Beijing today to finish the meeting. If you knock on the door again, I'll throw you directly from the 3rd floor." The next day, J5, who had not slept, was waiting for Xia Jinyuan to arrive in Beijing. At noon in the provincial capital, Yi Qian received a call from Xia Jinyuan in the dormitory manager's office. It turned out that he was already at the airport and specially called to inform her. Yi Qian breathed a sigh of relief and pursed his lips with a smile. Okay, see you next time. It was better to avoid it. At the very least, before she lost her willpower, she had to avoid it. Xia Jinyuan, who was sitting in the departure lounge, seemed to have heard her long exhale. This little girl was probably dying to see him. However, how could he let her do as she wished? His thin lips curled into a faint smile. You're such a two-faced little fox. You don't want to see me again, do you? No, you misunderstood. Yi Jian straightened her back subconsciously and heard his deep voice again. So you want me to come often too? Okay, I'll come to see you as long as I'm on vacation. Be good and wait for me to come back at school. Yi Jian nodded and said, so you want me to come often too? Okay, I'll come to see you whenever I'm on vacation. It was very gentle, like a feather gently brushing against her heart. It was just one sentence, but but it was so easy to stir up her emotions, making her feel his ambiguous presence following her like a shadow. Hurry up and go eat. I'm going to check in now. Goodbye, Yi Qian. Believe me, little fox, we'll meet again very soon. This is something that can't be avoided. The plane soared into the sky, and the rumbling sound came from the azure blue sky. Yi Qian, who was on his way to the cafeteria, stood under the shade of a tree and looked at the plane, which was as small as a matchbox, dragging a long white trail behind it. The plane headed north. Is he sitting in it? Yi Ying's voice came from behind him. During the first few days of school, she didn't forget to make friends with both old and new students. Moreover, she didn't care about their grades or their family background. Chapter 430. On the first day of school, she got along well with Zhao Hai. After all, he was the top student at the end of the first year of high school. However, when she found out that Zhao Hai's parents were just ordinary workers, she immediately showed a disdainful expression and no longer had the enthusiasm she had on the first day of school. Now, she knew how to make friends based on social status. Yi Zhifan had indeed taught Ying everything he knew. I can't participate in the military training, so I'll have to look after you guys. Fortunately, I'll prepare water. You guys can come find me if you're thirsty. Yi Ying said with a smile, full of gentleness and generosity. If you guys are tired, I can give you a shoulder massage. One of the girls laughed. No, I'm afraid that someone will hit me. So, did you promise him or not? Young Heng can play basketball, he's quite handsome, his grades are good, and his family background is good too. What are you hesitating for? When Yi Qian heard this, she couldn't help but laugh. Could it be that Yi Ying's high school life was the same as her middle school life? Yang Heng, then she had to be careful. She couldn't let it be another Gao Yang. No, Gao Yang just didn't know how to judge people. Later, he turned over a new leaf. She quickened her pace and soon left her voice far behind until it was no longer tormenting her ears. The sun was high in the sky. After passing through the green shrubs, she arrived at the cafeteria. She heard a lot of discussion about the military training. Some people were very excited, while others were frowning. Everyone had their own opinions about the military training. I don't want to go. I really want to take leave. The sun is so hot. It'll make me tan. Forget it if you don't want to go. I heard that the soldiers in the army will be our instructors. It'll be great if they're handsome. Even if they're tanned, I'll be happy. Two seniors were whispering as they lined up. When they found Jessen and the others, they were discussing the military training again. Seeing her sit down, Yang Yi, who was in the same dormitory, asked her, "Do you want to go? The entire high school will be participating. I heard that you'll have to sleep on the field. Won't you be fed to mosquitoes every day? It has to be recorded in the student records as a result. Everyone has to go, no exceptions." Yi Qian did not object at all. However, he felt that military training was child's play for him, so he said to Jessen and the others, "It's a chance to train. There's no harm in giving it a try, right? Besides, I think it's quite interesting to spend all 7 days together." And Jessen, who had been chewing on the ribs without saying a word, sighed heavily and said with a frown, "What's the big deal about military training? My dad wants me to enroll in some military school. Fuck, I've looked it up. How can a mediocre person like me get into a military school? It's better to be a female soldier after graduation. My dad wants me to go to the police academy, and your dad wants you to go to the military academy. Great minds think alike." Zhang Bin, who was passing by with a plate in his hand, laughed, "I think a tomboy like you should enter the military academy. You'll definitely be able to defeat all the male soldiers." And Justin was furious. You said I'm a man. You deserve a beating. Zhangbin makes a lot of sense. I think uncle is right. You should go to the military academy. Yi Qian was happy. After she left Fujian town, she had not contacted her classmates. She did not know what Justin's future was, but if she also went to the military academy, it would be a good idea. She was tall, had a good personality, and had good qualities. Her physical fitness could also pass. As long as she could get in, it would be fine. Chapter 431. You think so too? Then I have to think about it. And Justin pretended to be angry. She kicked Zhangbin, who was laughing, and sat down. I have thought about it too. It's difficult. We'll talk about it when the time comes. It's still early anyway. The school's announcement of the military training did make some people want to apply for military school. But it was just a thought. It was not easy to get into a military school. Yi Qian and the others were discussing the military training. Teacher Tong was sitting in Principal Chow's office. She smiled and said, since it's your arrangement, then there's no problem. Yi Qian is quite good at self-learning. I don't have to worry about him. I have no problem with him leaving after school in the afternoon. Okay, I'll let you know. Also, Yi Qian's situation is a bit special. If he asks for leave and the other students ask about it, just say that his family member is sick and he needs to go to the hospital to take care of them. Principal Chow arranged everything carefully so that Teacher Tong would not have any problems with it. He also made sure that Yi Qian would not be disliked by the other students because of his special situation. Yi Qian knew that he could leave the school with the other day students after the first class in the afternoon. He knew that the political commissar had arranged everything for him. Principal Chow told me that you have a big ambition and he is already preparing for it. I have faith in you. I know that you are a very disciplined student. Work hard. I hope to see good news for you in the year after next. Teacher Tong had told Yi Jian about it in the corridor outside the classroom after class. Looking at the girl in front of her, who was like a pine tree, and knowing that Yi Jian's goal was to apply for the military academy and that she was already preparing for it, Teacher Tong suddenly realized why Yi Jian had such a unique aura. This was the valiant aura of a soldier. She was as proud as a pine tree and as cold as a winter plum. She was definitely not comparable to those students who still wanted to play. Yi Ying was not going to participate. She was going to participate in an English competition on National Day. As for what she said to those high-ranking officials and rich kids, it was just for show. After Teacher Tong found out, she wrote on Yi Ying's file, due to health reasons, it is not suitable for her to participate in military training. Not only did they have to learn how to drive, but they also had to learn how to repair cars. On Yi Qian's first day, he was introduced to a pile of car parts. How many parts are there in a car? That was 100 times the size of a sniper rifle. Everything from a screw to a wire had to be recognized. Yi Qian gave her a book, a pile of car parts, some photos, and a car soldier. Under Political Commissar Yan's smiling gaze, Yi Qian began to identify the car parts. Yi Qian was able to calm her mind, and once she calmed down, she would not be distracted even if a bomb went off beside her. If she could recognize the parts, then so be it. She could recognize the guns and ammunition of every country, so it was not difficult for her to recognize the parts of a car. Just as Lu Tuan had said, Yi Qian's speed of improvement scared the car soldiers around her. It was fine on the first day, but on the second day, when the battalion commander came to test her, she was able to identify the parts one by one. She even knew where they were installed. After that, when Yi Qian was teaching driving, the car soldiers were all terrified. Chapter 432. On the third day, the car soldier who was training with her was replaced by another car soldier who was heading to the capital this year. Identity, driver, special assignment, bodyguard. According to the changes in the mission situation, we will use a combination of indoor simulated driving and field driving. Normally, the most we need to use is flying. Watch carefully, like this. A car soldier who was about to enter Zongnanhai was teaching Yi Qian, who was sitting in the front passenger seat. As he finished speaking, the jeep rushed out with a boom and rose into the air again. She stepped on the accelerator and started the car at high speed. Yi Qian could feel the entire car rise into the air. After passing through the broken section, it landed with a bang. At the same time, the car soldier fired continuously with his gun. The obstacles on the left and right sides were all blown away. Yi Qian, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, felt what it was like to see a bunch of bullets fly past her eyes. Exciting. Absolutely exciting. Faint smoke swept past the tip of her nose. She couldn't see the bullets, but she could feel their power. Even if they were empty bullets, there was still some residual power. Whether it was the car soldier's driving movements or the way he fired the gun, the car soldier was so cool that Yi Qian had the word respect written all over her face. She had no choice but to accept it. She had to operate the steering wheel with one hand and look forward with both eyes. At the same time, she had to aim and shoot. She had no choice but to accept it. There was always someone better than her. Yi Qian had always known that the reason why she improved so quickly was because of her 2 lifetimes of experience. As for them, they had relied on their own abilities to get to where they were today. Yi Qian was so focused on training that she almost forgot to eat and sleep. Especially from Friday afternoon until Sunday, even the male soldiers couldn't help but tremble in fear when they saw her ferocity. She started from touching the steering wheel to speeding around the circle at over 200 kilometers per hour. Bullets were fired continuously from both the front and back seats. The targets outside the circle fell one by one. The engine roared so fast that it covered the sound of the bullets. Yi Qian, who was driving, had a cold expression. She changed gears and stepped on the accelerator to the max. After coming out of the circle, she rushed directly to the broken bridge. Maintain speed, 10. 9, 8. 7, 6. 1, fly. The instructor's stern voice came through the earpiece, reminding Yi Qian that she was close to the broken bridge and that she was about to complete her first flight across the broken bridge in half a month. Amidst the instructor's stern voice, the jeep's engine seemed to have reached its limit. The engine roared like a fighter jet. Yi Qian, on the other hand, did not notice that she was about to fly the jeep over the broken bridge. The car soared into the air and landed on the ground with a loud bang. After changing gears, the car shot off from the bridge like an arrow leaving the bow and rushed straight to the finish line. There were already people waiting at the finish line. One of them was holding a timer, while the other was waiting for the car to arrive. The car door was opened from the outside. Political Commissar Yen stood outside with a warm smile, clapping his hands. The results will be out in half a month. Girl Jian, we can see your results and we are very happy. Passing in 3 minutes. You used 2 minutes and 46 seconds. Passing. The soldier keeping time recorded Yi Qian's results in the scorebook. The scorebook recorded all of Yi Qian's training results, from failing to pass, to passing, and then to passing. Chapter 433. Her progress was so fast that even the veterans were full of energy. If they were beaten by a high school student who didn't even know how to drive, even if they entered Zongnanhai, they wouldn't feel good about it. However, some people were born to be worshipped by others. Yi Jian, who had only made one mistake in her previous life, had been reborn. She was like a golden scale in a pond, which would turn into a dragon when it encountered a storm. Yi Qian, whose back was already drenched in sweat, raised her hand to wipe away the sweat that was about to drip into her eyes. She took the score book from the soldier and read it carefully. Her face was expressionless, but the corners of her mouth were tightly pursed. Not enough. 2 minutes and 46 seconds. You failed. Little girl, if I remember correctly, tonight is your first time flying over the broken bridge. How can you say you failed with this result? Commissar Yen knew that the girl in front of him, whose eyes were as bright as stars, was strict with herself after every training session, but he didn't know that she was this strict. Commissar Yen, who was afraid that going too far was as bad as not going too far, immediately comforted her. You only touched the car for 12 days. Look, you passed this subject training in 12 days. Girl Jian, it's good to be strict with yourself, but you can't set too high a goal. If your goal is too high, you will not be able to surpass it one day. Sometimes, it's not a motivation, but a dispirited feeling. 2 minutes and 46 seconds. Let the instructor say it. If he says you passed, then you passed. Yi Qian saw that the commissar was trying his best to persuade her and was afraid that she would go to the extreme. She couldn't help but laugh out loud. Her eyes curved like crescent moons. Commissar, don't worry. I know. I know. I think you don't know anything. Take a rest first. If you continue to train like this, I'm afraid of you. Soldiers were too outstanding. As a leader, there was a lot of pressure. He was afraid that something unexpected would happen during the training. Yi Qian saw that he was really worried about her, so she didn't refuse. She obediently followed him to the side to rest. The instructor who taught her jogged over and answered the commissar's questions one by one. You're improving very fast. You have a strong sense of direction. You have a fierce spirit that's not afraid of death. That's why you're practicing very fast. The instructor's evaluation of Yi Qian was based on the fact that she was not afraid of death. She had no fear of death, so she could easily pass through the door of life and death. Even the male soldiers did not have her guts. But political commissar Yen was afraid. He couldn't let anything happen to such a good seedling. He said seriously, remember to put safety first during the training. She is stubborn. You can't be stubborn with her. After reprimanding the instructor, he sternly swept his gaze over the two of them and said in a deep voice, you two better remember this. We have to produce results, but we can't lose our lives. If I lose my life, what's the point of having a pile of results? The instructor was simply being lectured by Yi Qian. After the political commissar left, the instructor from Xiang province laughed and said, you little girl, when you worked hard, even I was motivated to work hard. This time, we were all lectured. However, what the political commissar said does make sense. We have to produce results, but no matter how good the results are, if we lose our lives, it will just be a pile of dead results. Yi Qian felt bad for implicating the instructor. He said softly, how about this? In the future, when political commissar and regimental commander Liu are here, we can relax a little. After they leave, we can work harder. What do you think? No way. I'm scared of you, Yi Qian. Even third brother Daredevil would not work as hard as you. The instructor rejected directly. Although he said that, Yi Qian was the kind of person who could easily inspire soldiers on the battlefield. When she worked hard, the other male soldiers did not dare to fall behind. When she worked hard, they also worked hard. Everyone's results were on the rise. Chapter 434. After receiving the results, Regiment Commander Luke said to Political Commissar Yen, "Whichever battalion this girl is placed in, the standard of the battalion will rise like a rocket. Her results in the past 10 days are almost as good as the results of an automobile soldier for half a year. Friday night happens to be night driving. How about this? Assign a co-pilot to her car and let her try." Night driving was also part of the training. It was an essential training for every bus station soldier. Driving on mountain roads. Political Commissar Yan's face showed a trace of seriousness. After a long silence, he gently shook his head. "No. Driving on mountain roads is unpredictable and risky. It is all winding roads with 180-degree turns. There are no railings on the sides. She also has to maintain a certain distance from the cars in front. Old Lou, I don't agree with her driving on mountain roads. After all, it had only been 10 days. Practice on the training ground was like practice making perfect. Practicing a few more times and completing a series of actions under the instructor's instructions was a layer of protection. But it was different on mountain roads. It was all about experience. It was not just about courage. Not enough experience. I don't recommend night driving. Regiment Commander Liu sighed. After a moment of silence, he replied, "You're right. She does lack experience. Let's see how her results are in the next 2 weeks. If possible, she should try it before going to the capital. She still has to try. If she doesn't try, she doesn't know what to do. The leader's itinerary will be out soon. Once there is night driving, as one of the accompanying bodyguards, the girl must pass the night driving training. Otherwise, we can't assign her to the leader's side." Regiment Commander Liu's concerns made Political Commissar Yen finally nod in agreement. "Okay, let's test it before going to the capital." Yi Qian didn't know that she had become a frequent topic of discussion between the regiment commander and the political commissar. It also made Political Commissar Yen hesitate to talk to her a few times. Until Friday of the 3rd week, Yi Qian didn't know that she might need to undergo night driving training. She steadily started the car, changed gears, changed speeds, and turned. Her movements were as smooth as flowing water. There was not a trace of strangeness. There's a bumpy road ahead, a single-sided bridge, and a double-sided bridge. Yi Qian, maintain your speed and cross it quickly. The instructor's cold voice came through the earpiece, instructing Yi Qian to complete the training test. Yi Qian drove forward, made a right-angle turn, and crossed the single-track bridge. Yi Qian maintained the speed and drove the car as if she was walking on her own. She passed the bridge smoothly. Political Commissar Yen looked at the jeep on the training ground, which looked like a veteran driving a jeep. She finished the entire training course only 20 seconds later than an outstanding veteran. What training will there be later? He walked over to Yi Qian's instructor and said in a low voice, "It's already 4:00 in the afternoon. She still needs to catch up with the evening self-study." The instructor flipped open the training chart and said softly, "This is a subject that we started practicing last night. Cross a one-sided bridge and move forward in 2 wheels." Moving forward in 2 wheels meant that one of the wheels moved forward quickly and completed a drift. "Okay, let her rest for a while after this. I saw her take a bandage from the hospital just now. Her palms must have been rubbed until they had blisters." Yes, from Friday to Sunday, she practiced until 1:00 in the evening. She woke up on time at 6:00 the next day to train. The young lady's skin is tender. Plus, she had to turn the steering wheel quickly during the past 2 days of training, so, she developed blisters. The instructor's explanation was still a little vague. Yi Qian's palms not only had one blister, but both of his hands had blisters as well. It just so happened that the blisters formed a line between his fingers and his palms. Chapter 435. A few blisters popped, revealing a layer of pink skin tissue. After spraying anti-inflammatory medicine, she wrapped the bandage around her hand and continued to practice. The political commissar asked the instructor to inform Yi Qian through the headset and then went to discuss with Lu Tuan. After a week, Jian Yiling's driving skills had improved. This could make up for her lack of experience. It was time to rest. Other than Yi Qian, who was still training, all the soldiers, including the soldiers who were in charge of maintaining the vehicles, had already rested. There was only one vehicle rumbling on the field, which was particularly eye-catching. Where did this little girl come from? She's training so hard every day as if she's going to the battlefield tomorrow. Just looking at her gives me the creeps. Maybe she's some leader's daughter who joined the army in winter. Otherwise, she wouldn't be training so hard. Nonsense. That little girl isn't even 18 years old. She's still a high school student. Why would she join the army? Besides, which leader's daughter would be willing to suffer with us soldiers? Didn't one of the leaders bring his daughter here last time? I saw that she even had to ask the guards to bring her water. Shoo! Lower your voice. Do you want to be punished? You even dare to talk about your leader behind his back. A few soldiers in the resting room sat together and chatted softly. When they saw that the training vehicle had not stopped, they looked over and more or less talked about it. Most of these soldiers were soldiers who joined the army last year and were assigned to the vehicle company in June of this year. They weren't in the same position as the soldiers who were going to Zongnanhai immediately. They were in charge of repairing and maintaining the vehicles in the company. They arrived on Friday, and Yi Qian happened to be here for the next few days. Those who didn't know would inevitably talk about it secretly. But more of them were envious. The soldiers who touched the vehicles directly in the company were all elite soldiers. When they started training here one day, they would really be able to make a name for themselves. You guys are sitting here chatting like gossips, aren't you? A powerful baritone voice came from behind them. The male soldiers stood up in a row and turned around. Regiment commander. It was Lu Tuan, who walked past them. He stood in front of them and glanced at them with a serious expression. The male soldiers immediately felt a burst of pressure. Even so, they had to raise their heads and stick out their chests. They couldn't move. Do you all have nothing better to do? Repair all the wheels in front of me. Paint the wheels for me. Do you hear me? Lu Tuan's prestige in the unit was extremely high. Every word he said represented the military's prestige. The soldiers could only obey and absolutely could not resist. A soldier's duty was to obey orders. As long as it was correct, they had no reason to refute it. Just like now, they were caught by their regiment commander discussing right and wrong behind their backs. He only told them to do what they were supposed to do. Who would dare to say they didn't want to do it? If you don't want to do it, then wait for your punishment. The soldiers did not dare to utter a single word as they replied in unison, "Yes, sir." Then, they immediately jogged to the front of the mountain-like wheel and started doing maintenance on it. The tires were neatly stacked one after another. They needed to be taken down and carefully maintained. Some tires were worn out and needed to be scrapped. For newbies like Yi Qian, it was easy for the wheels to wear out when they first started driving. If they braked too quickly, they would leave tire marks on the ground. But not now. The steering wheel was like an obedient child in Yi Qian's hands. It would move no matter how she moved it. Chapter 436. Yi Qian, get ready for a one-sided flight. Accelerate, rush onto the one-sided bridge, and complete a one-sided drift. The instructor instructed Yi Qian to complete the last exercise. He stood not far away and waved a flag, ready, begin. With the wave of the flag, Yi Qian began the last training exercise of the day. Driving onto the one-sided bridge, the center of gravity of the car shifted to the driver's seat. Yi Qian stepped on the accelerator and quickly changed gears. The car, which was originally four-wheeled, suddenly shifted to two-wheeled, and began drifting at high speed. Driving diagonally from one side, it drifted forward in an arc. Lu Tuan, who was observing from the side, laughed and said to his old partner, "This level of skill can make up for her lack of experience to a certain extent. In the fourth week, arrange a car for her on Friday and Saturday nights. Let her drive during the day on Sunday. Treat it as a break for school on Monday, and leave for the capital on Tuesday." This time, I didn't mean to. Political Commissar Yen, who was still smiling a second ago, suddenly changed his expression and rushed towards the car. Lu Tuan was next. His expression changed as he threw away the score book in his hand and ran a few meters away. A wheel came out of nowhere and rolled directly towards Yi Qian's drifting car. Yi Qian's field of vision was very limited due to her lowered vision. It was impossible for her to notice such a sudden appearance and rolling towards the right side of the car. The instructor also noticed the danger, but he didn't panic. Instead, he spoke quickly and calmly, "Abnormality on the right side, avoid it." There was no time to tell him how to avoid it. It was all up to Yi Qian to deal with the situation on the spot and resolve the danger. Abnormality on the right side, draw a wide arc and accelerate to avoid the danger. However, if the arc was drawn out, the rear of the car would inevitably hit the barriers on both sides. But it was better than losing both the car and people. Inside the car, Yi Qian, whose eyes were cold, sped up and dodged the rolling wheel at lightning speed. Then, he turned the steering wheel. Bang! A loud sound was heard, and the car that was drifting to one side was forced to land on all four wheels. He didn't step on the brakes in a hurry. Instead, he slowed down rhythmically, and the rear of the car drifted backward. Under everyone's tense gaze, the car once again made a loud crash sound. In the capital, Xia Jinyuan, who had taken off his military uniform and was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, was memorizing some foreign culture and customs that he needed to remember during the exchange between the two countries. Suddenly, his heart started to panic. It came so suddenly that his face turned pale. He couldn't help but press his hand against his chest. His back arched as he pressed down on the dozens of pages of information with one hand. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. What happened to you?" J5, who was also memorizing the information, frowned and said softly, "You have gastric problems. Is your stomach acting up?" K7 raised his head and glanced at him. He said emotionlessly, "Is your stomach in your chest? Have you ever seen a man with a stomach in his chest?" Then, he looked at Xia Jinyuan and frowned slightly. "Stand up and take a walk. Drink a glass of cold water to calm it down. It's nothing serious. It's just a normal heart palpitation. Normal heart palpitations don't need to be treated. Let's take a walk and get some fresh air. Also, Q King, are you afraid that you can't finish memorizing all this information?" The panic came and went quickly. It had already disappeared while K7 was talking. Xia Jinyuan looked at the dozens of pages of information he had memorized and frowned. "No, it's just that my heart skipped a beat. It's very uncomfortable and flustered." Chapter 437. It was as if something big had happened and he was panicking. Suddenly, Xia Jinyuan seemed to have thought of something. He stood up and said to the two of them, "I'm going out to make a call. Go ahead and take a look. I'll be back in 5 minutes." After rushing out of the meeting room, Xia Jinyuan immediately called Lu Tuan. As soon as the call went through, he quickly asked, "Lu Tuan, how's Yi Qian's training?" He did not hide his anxiety at all. He was anxious to know the situation. You don't usually call. Once you do, you run into trouble. Lu Tuan sighed heavily. With a gloomy expression on his face, he said, "A minute ago, Miss Jian had an accident during training. The military doctor is checking on her now. If she feels any discomfort, send her to the hospital immediately." In an instant, Xia Jinyuan felt as if his entire body had been plunged into a cold lake. He felt as if his heart had been ruthlessly torn in half and hung in midair. His deep, cold eyes suddenly darkened. The alternating cold and pain made his breathing become labored. His voice was chilling. How could there be an accident? How is she now? Are there any obvious and substantial external injuries? There are no external injuries. There was a wheel during the side driving training. Lu Tuan's expression became increasingly gloomy as he briefly explained the situation. There are no external injuries. Miss Jian was fearless in the face of danger. She minimized the danger and hit the barrier with the back of the car. He glanced at Yi Qian, who was cooperating with the military doctor. Apart from her slightly pale expression, she was calmer than everyone else present. A trace of a smile accompanied with a sigh. She's very clear-headed. She can even comfort me and old Yen. The military doctor said that she was very calm. Even her heartbeat did not change. It didn't scare her. It scared us. Hearing this, Xia Jinyuan felt as if he had just walked out of a cold lake. His entire body was trembling with fear. There was a wheel during the side driving training. Just thinking about it made Xia Jinyuan start to break out in cold sweat again. If his little fox had reacted a little slower, the car would have been destroyed. Lu Tuan, I want to talk to her. Sorry to trouble you. He could only relax when he heard her voice. His gaze was cold as he stood by the window outside. His entire body was emitting cold air, and the surrounding air seemed to have turned into frost. Yi Qian raised his arm and swung it back and forth under the military doctor's instructions. I'm fine. There's no dislocation or fracture. His chest didn't hurt, nor did it feel stuffy. Doctor, I think I should be fine, except for the abrasions on my arms. When the rear of the car hit, the front airbag popped out. The head hit the airbag, but the upper body was protected. Only his left arm had rubbed against the car door, and a large piece of his skin had been rubbed off. It looked terrifying, but it wasn't a big deal. Lu Tuan handed the phone over and looked at the girl who was relaxed and bold. He smiled and sighed, You're so lucky. It's Major Xia. He wants to talk to you. The military doctor who had taken Yi Qian's blood pressure confirmed that other than the abrasions on his arms, there were no other major injuries. He put away his stethoscope and said to Lu Tuan, Other than the abrasions on his arms, there are no other problems. Spray some disinfectant and apply some purple iodine for 2 days. It should scab tomorrow. It was good that she was fine. Xia Jinyuan heard her gentle voice, like a wind chime swaying gently in the drizzle, gently knocking against his chest. Your call is too coincidental. I've been fine for more than 20 days, but something happened today and you called. Yi Qian stood up and moved her wrists. Under the gaze of Lu Tuan, and many soldiers, she coughed lightly and hinted, Everyone is worried about me. Captain Xia, I'm fine. Don't worry, I'm hanging up. Chapter 438. Yi Qian really wanted to hang up the phone as soon as possible. She was completely not used to doing private things in public, such as answering the phone. After saying that, she felt a little uneasy. She pursed her lips and said softly, How about I contact you when I get back to school? Is it convenient for you to give me your number? How about I contact you when I get back to school? Platoon Commander Liu and the political commissar are both there. She didn't expect her call to come at such a timely time. The coldness on Xia Jinyuan's face gradually faded as he chuckled softly. This feeling was actually really good. It was as if their hearts were linked. Even if they were thousands of miles away, he could still sense whether she was safe or not. The second he felt his heart palpitate, and panic happened to be the second she got into an accident during training. It turned out that the mysterious feeling of having telepathy really existed, and it existed in his heart. Little fox, where do you think you're going to escape to? Even if you were thousands of miles away, he would definitely be able to find you. Hearing his laughter, Yi Qian laughed as well. I'm fine here. The military doctor has left. You, don't worry. He really did care about her and was willing to help her. In short, she could only repay his kindness after she entered the military camp. As long as it wasn't against the military rules, she would definitely help him as long as he asked. In her previous life, Yi Qian had always used this method to repay those who had helped her and shown her kindness. She was such a girl. No matter how difficult life was, she still had kindness in her heart. Kind and magnanimous people could survive no matter how difficult life was. Yi Qian was like that. Are you afraid that I'll be angry? As she explained, Xia Jinyuan's lips curled up slightly. His gaze deepened as he looked into the distance. I'm not angry. I just want to hear your voice, little fox. But I'm really worried about you. When I heard Platoon Commander Liu say that something happened during your training, I couldn't wait to be by your side immediately. His low voice was like the richest and most intoxicating red wine. Not only was the color rich, but the smell was also intoxicating. She felt intoxicated even through the phone. It seemed like she was a little drunk. It was so noisy all around, but she could only hear his voice. Because in her heart, only his voice existed. Every word was like a musical note, coming slowly with the rhythm of her heartbeat. It was too quiet. It was so quiet that she could only hear his voice whispering in her ears. However, there was a voice in her heart that kept reminding her, stay strong, stay strong. Bring out your determination. Alright, I won't tease you anymore. I have something to do here. Take down my phone number first. She seemed to be so nervous that she even held her breath. Xia Jinyuan, who was reporting a set of numbers, narrowed his eyes dangerously. Are you nervous? That's right, what he said just now was indeed a little over the line. His feelings for her were always somewhat uncontrollable, so he could only try his best to control it. Xia Jinyuan was a man with strong self-control. As a soldier, there were times when he had to cast aside his 7 emotions and 6 desires. He was also very clear that his feelings for Yi Qian were derived from admiration. He was still one step away from falling in love with her. Therefore, he had to be careful when he spoke. He couldn't make Yi Qian feel troubled, but he also had to let her feel that there was a hint of affection between him and her. What Xia Jinyuan wanted was this kind of ambiguous relationship that was faintly discernible, with a hint of affection that would never cross the line. Chapter 439. Fortunately, Yi Qian was already used to it. He repeated Xia Jinyuan's number again, and after confirming that it was correct, he smiled faintly and said, Okay, I'll contact you when I get back to school. It was best to remain calm when interacting with Captain Xia. That would also improve one's composure. The fact that Xia Jinyuan was able to quickly regain his composure and reply indifferently made the corners of Xia Jinyuan's lips curl up into a meaningful smile. If this went on, those little boys would want to flirt with little fox. In her eyes, they would be nothing more than clowns. But he was different. He was the one who held her hand and could walk side by side with her. They walked the same path, walked towards the same goal, and fought side by side. Therefore, he was destined to be different. You're still smiling after hanging up. TSK, that expression of yours is giving me goosebumps. J5's voice sounded lazily from the side. His eyes darkened as he looked at the phone line in the distance. Q King was still flirting with Yi Qian, and there was a hint of darkness in his indifferent expression. Brother, you have to remember what you said. For yourself and for Yi Qian. Now that you're in such a hurry to make a move, you might end up harming Yi Qian. J5 did not need to beat around the bush when speaking to his comrade. Instead, he chose to say it at the right time. Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows, and a smile spread from the corners of his eyes. When he spoke to Yi Qian, his elegant and noble demeanor did not fade away. The sharpness in his words was restrained. Standing in front of J5, dressed in a suit, he looked like a refined and gentle young master. Thank you for the reminder. Yi Qian is still young. No matter what, I can't end up harming her. After Xia Jinyuan finished speaking, the gentleness on his face faded and was replaced by a trace of coldness. J5, I will deal with my personal affairs. I know that you are still an instructor in the Snowfield Brigade, but I can tell you clearly that I will obey your orders for combat missions, but please don't pay too much attention to my personal affairs. In the unit, Xia Jinyuan rarely showed his cold and sharp side. He even consciously restrained his arrogance, because everyone knew that joining the Snowfield Brigade was equivalent to abandoning your previous identity. No matter who you used to be, you were a professional soldier in the unit and would absolutely obey orders. But even so, Xia Jinyuan had his own bottom line, such as personal matters. It didn't matter if his comrade made fun of him, but he couldn't accept it if it was too deep. I'm very sorry, Q King. I was being presumptuous. I have a bad habit of worrying, especially when something happened in the unit in the past. So, whenever a member of the unit is tempted, it's as if I'm facing a formidable enemy. Seeing this, J5's expression turned serious and he immediately apologized. I'm very sorry. This is the last time I mention your personal affairs with Yi Qian. Xia Jinyuan waved his hand and smiled. You don't have to apologize. I don't like it when the unit pays too much attention to my personal affairs. I'm Yi Qian and you know that she's still a high school student. You've seen her with your own eyes, so you know that she only avoids me. But there are still some brothers in the unit who don't know about it. I don't want to ruin that girl's image because of me. There was a deeper meaning to his words. J5 looked at Xia Jinyuan thoughtfully and saw a hint of a meaningful smile at the corner of his mouth. After thinking for a while, J5 suddenly realized something and said in surprise, You have such thoughts. Does she know? Also, don't you know that our unit never recruits female soldiers? Chapter 440. She doesn't know yet, but I'll make sure she sets her sights higher. So what if she doesn't recruit female soldiers? I dare say that her marksmanship isn't any worse than any of us here. Don't scare me, I'm not that easily scared. J5 was so shocked that he took a step back. He couldn't believe his comrade who was so proud of his little girl. He couldn't accept that a high school student's marksmanship wasn't any worse than their Snowfield Brigade Special Forces. Xia Jinyuan took a step forward. His eyes were burning with passion. He patted J5's shoulder with a smile and restrained his pride. He said calmly, When have I ever exaggerated? Didn't you guys see her marksmanship when she was sniping the #1 target in the no man's land? It's already been more than a year. Do you think my little fox is still stuck in the same place? No, she's improving at lightning speed. His little fox was a warrior who relied on her own 2 hands to create a world for herself. She used her strong will and perseverance to overcome difficulties time and time again. Her roots were deep, her steps were steady, and her marksmanship wasn't any worse than a Special Forces soldier's. What was so surprising about that? Uncle Chen and Uncle Jen's training for her was strictly based on the training methods of the Triangle State Army. She was a Special Forces soldier without a military uniform. Xia Jinyuan had been out for more than 5 minutes. He still had a few pages of documents to read. After admiring J5's unsettled expression, he walked gracefully towards the conference room. Look, even a Special Forces soldier was surprised by his little fox's ability. What kind of commotion would she cause when she joined the army? By then, his little fox would be like a bright moon. Although quiet, she would be the brightest light in the darkness, attracting everyone's attention. It was a wise move for him to make his move in advance. Hey, wait. He brushed past J5's shoulder. J5's eyes lit up as he thought of something. He turned around and chased after him. Did they mention Yi Qian's name in the meeting because she's also on the list? The pistol that Duo prepared was also prepared for her. Fuck, why are you in such a hurry? Can't you explain yourself? Xia Jinyuan turned a deaf ear and pushed open the tightly shut door of the conference room. He then closed the door again, blocking out the J5's voice. G3 looked up from the information and frowned. He said calmly, he likes to worry. He did in the past, and he still does now. If there's anything you're not satisfied with, just tell him. He'll understand. He kept thinking about the incident between Q King and that female student. He was afraid that history would repeat itself. As long as Q King went to the southern province, he would be anxious every day. It was normal to be concerned about your brother, but it was not right to be overly worried. It's fine. He didn't say anything. It's just that he doesn't understand something in his heart, and I didn't tell him. He's just throwing a little tantrum now. Xia Jinyuan sat down calmly and crossed his long legs elegantly. He concentrated on reading the information that he hadn't finished reading. His little fox was fine, and his reading speed increased. Life was indeed full of ups and downs, but it returned to normal in the blink of an eye. Yi Qian returned to the city at 4 p.m. with Lu Tuan, who happened to have something to do at the provincial military base. She could not miss the evening self-study on Sunday night. She had to be back before 5 p.m. I'll be back on time tomorrow afternoon. I've made you and the political commissar worry today. After getting out of the car, Yi Qian stood by the open car door and smiled at Lu Tuan, who was sitting in the car. I'll go in first. See you tomorrow. Chapter 441. Lu Tuan waved his hand at her and said with a serious but caring smile, as long as you can hold on, you're welcome to come at any time. Now, you're my soldier, so I have to be strict with you. You can't be lazy just because of a small injury. I won't be lazy. Don't worry. Yi Qian closed the car door with a smile on his face. He waved his hand and watched the car leave before walking towards the school gate. On the other side of the road, Yi Ying quickly wrote down a license plate number on her notebook with a fountain pen. Looking at Yi Jian, who was walking towards the school gate, a sharp sneer appeared at the corner of her mouth. Yi Jian. No wonder her classmates said that she didn't go to the evening self-study class since school started. It turned out that she had a car to fetch her every day. This was a discovery. She had to tell her family the license plate number and find out who it was. Yao Jing, who was good friends with Yi Ying, walked over and patted Yi Ying's shoulder. Wasn't that Yi Qian? Who drove her to school? Yi Ying, who was deep in thought, was startled by the tap. She quickly closed her notebook, patted her chest, and turned around. With a look of lingering fear, she said angrily, "You scared me to death. Why are you here so early today?" Don't you usually come when class is about to start? My mom is attending a banquet tonight. No one at home asked the driver to send her to school early. I asked you a question. Did you see who drove Yi Qian back? Didn't they say her family is so poor that they can't even afford her school fees? Why would someone drive her to school? Yao Jing was a woman of her word at home. Seeing that Ying didn't answer, she urged, hurry up and say it. You're mute. Ying put her notebook back into her bag and smiled. I don't know. My family doesn't have any relatives who drive her to school. Maybe she met someone outside. Met someone outside. Who would drive her back? I don't know. I was just guessing. Aya, let's not talk about her. It has nothing to do with us. Yi Ying, whose eyes were shining, carried her bag and said with a smile, is Lo Mei's birthday coming soon? What are you going to give her? The topic then turned to the birthday gift for a good friend. After returning to the dormitory, Yi Qian was surrounded by her classmates and Justin and the other girls. When they saw the hideous scar on her hand, they all gasped. It's just that I was hit by someone's bicycle and fell to the ground. It's just a little scratched. It's really nothing else. Don't look at me like I've broken a bone. It really doesn't hurt. And Jessin raised her arm and looked at it again and again. Then, she said to the students whose expressions had changed, it's fine. The purple iodine solution covered a large area and looked scary. I used to fall on my butt and look worse than her. Don't worry, the scab will form tomorrow. She herself was a person who was resistant to falling. Her father was a geologist. Every summer, who knew how many times she would fall and get injured? A small injury like this was nothing to her. When the girls in the dormitory heard this, Yang Yi said angrily, do you think Yi Qian is a tomboy like you? Look at you. One look and you can tell that you grew up from a young age. Yi Qian is different. Her skin is soft and tender. Her skin is as white as snow. She can't fall and fight like you. When she said this, Yi Qian pursed her lips and laughed. The one who could fall and fight was not Justin, but Yi Qian. Her fair skin really had an advantage. It left a delicate impression. Chapter 442. On the other side, Justin was unhappy. She laughed and chased after her. Yang Yi, you know too much. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to destroy you on behalf of the universe. Yang Yi and Justin were classmates in the first year of high school. She knew more about tomboys than the other three. They talked about what happened in the first year of high school. Justin fought with a boy from the third year. She rode on the other party's waist and beat him up all by herself. It was obvious how strong she was. Yi Qian, who was packing up her textbooks, heard this and kept a calm smile on her face. Her high school life was very comfortable, except for Ying, who appeared from time to time. This kind of high school life was not in vain. When they were eating dinner in the cafeteria, Zhang Bin came over and invited them to watch a basketball game. The second and third years of high school had a basketball competition. Today, it was Zhang Bin's turn to play a warm-up game. Yi Qian had never watched a basketball game between students before. Hearing this, she agreed readily. Little girls loved to watch it, not because they liked watching basketball, but because they liked watching boys play basketball. Even Justin was excited. They're playing against the third year's second class today. The boys from the second class are playing basketball. Handsome. Hurry up and eat, we'll watch it after dinner. It was not because of Zhang Bin, but because of the other boys. This made Zhang Bin, who had not gone far, angry. He had not even played yet, but he was already angry. When Yi Qian and the other girls arrived, the front row of the basketball court was full of students. The first year of high school had returned to school 2 weeks ago. Once they came back, the school became more lively. Even the cheers were much louder. Over here, over here. Zhang Bin, who had been paying attention, saved a seat. When he saw the 6 of them, he immediately ran over from the court. The boy was tall, almost 1.8 meters tall. Standing in front of the petite girls, he was full of youthful energy and also showed off the charm of a boy. I saved a good seat for you guys. Tonight's self-study session starts at 8 o'clock. You guys have to watch until the end. As he spoke, his eyes kept glancing at Injesin's face. She could see through the little boy's thoughts at a glance. However, Injesin did not look at them at all. Her attention was completely focused on the boys who surrounded a few girls in high spirits. Then, Yi Qian said, Look, it's that Yanghang. It was that Yanghang. He's my fucking Prince Charming. Yi Qian felt like he was being struck by lightning. Yanghang was Injesin's Prince Charming. Yanghang is average. He looks skinny and not as strong as Zhang Bin. Yi Qian felt that Injesin's Prince Charming had to be changed. Injesin's Prince Charming, who liked Ying. TSK. It must be the Zebra Prince. His entire body was covered in flowers, and he was blind. When Zhang Bin heard that, he purposely puffed out his chest and directly blocked Injesin's unbridled gaze of admiring Yanghang. Look at how discerning Yi Jian is. You've known her for so long, why haven't you learned anything from her? Stop, make way. It was really difficult for a thick-skinned person like Injesin to realize that something was wrong. She glared at Zhang Bin and wished she could run over to show her enthusiasm. He's so handsome, I like this type. Yi Qian, you haven't seen him in a school uniform before, right? Look at our blue and white striped school uniform. He's just like a model. He's so handsome. And Jesin did not stop praising Yanghang. She was not the only one. Yi Qian listened until the end and was full of praises for him. Chapter 443. In the eyes of other girls, Yanghang was indeed a pretty good boy. His grades were good, and his name was definitely in the top 5 of the cohort. He looked delicate and pretty, and his frame was not bulky, which was exactly what girls liked. When he was thin and muscular, he looked skinny in the school uniform, but when he put on a basketball uniform, he looked strong. This type of boy was the best at winning girls' attention. But in Yi Qian's eyes, he was just a little boy who was still wet behind the ears. Was that what he called strong? It was thin, okay. Captain Xiao's body was strong. Good-looking bones. The proportions were obviously not. Captain Xiao's body was the real golden ratio. Was he good-looking? At most, he would act handsome from time to fool girls. Captain Xiao's facial features were exquisite, like a jade carving. Was he handsome in the school uniform? She didn't see him. Only soldiers in the army would walk out with handsome and mighty soldiers in their uniforms. Every one of them was a good boy. In comparison, Yi Qian felt that Yanghang was not good enough at all. She hadn't realized that her taste in boys was so high that she was using Xia Jinyuan as a template for comparison. She had to admit that Major Xia's strategy was indeed effective. Compared to Major Xia, the little boy was completely incomparable. There were still 5 minutes before the start of the game. The boys on the court were all warming up. While Jesin was happily watching, Yi Qian saw Yi Ying and a few other girls walking directly to the court. Their target was very clear. It was Jesin's Prince Charming, Yanghang. Jiasin, look at who's on the court and who's walking towards. Don't be angry, you must stay calm. Yi Qian had just wanted to change the Prince Charming in her heart, and now the opportunity had come. Yi Qian gently reminded Jiasin, who only had eyes for him and did not see Ying. At the same time, she braced herself for this person's anger. After taking a closer look, Jiasin felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over her. Her eyes widened, and a loud "fuck" came out of her mouth, attracting the attention of countless people. How can this be? That little bitch Ying knows Yang Heng. Not only do they know each other, but Yang Heng also took the water from her hand. It was rare for Yi Qian to take the initiative to pat Jiasin's shoulder. He said to Jiasin, whose eyes were about to pop out of their sockets, "Don't you think that the boys who like Ying are all blind? It's just like how a scholar is only interested in the female ghost's appearance, but he can't see through the white bones underneath." And Jiasin rubbed her face. Her personality was like a boy's, so her way of dealing with things was different. After cursing, she wailed, "Are you kidding me? I always thought that I had good taste, but now it seems that I was blind." She only thought that the other party was good at basketball. Now that Ying had appeared, she was disgusted. Instantly, she had no other thoughts, let alone the Prince Charming, in her heart. Zhang Bin only felt that the unhappiness in his heart was finally gone. It was resolved so quickly. Ha ha ha, he originally wanted to compete on the court. Yi Qian didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that Yang Heng and the other man's gaze had turned in their direction a few times. There was a group of people behind them, so he couldn't be sure who they were looking at. Leave this to me. I'll make sure that she can't speak of her suffering. She won't be able to find trouble with us. A boy wearing jersey number 8 patted his chest and said to Yao Jing, "If I had known that Ying would be taken advantage of by her. Fuck, I would have dealt with her long ago." Chapter 444. Yao Jing laughed. Although her facial features weren't as delicate as Yi Ying's, she had confidence that made her seem radiant. Looking at the guy who stood up for Yi Ying, she raised her voice and said, "As long as you stand up for Yi Ying, we'll have fun next Friday night." "Yi Ying, can you say it yourself?" "No." Yi Ying rejected directly. She was a little angry. This Yao Jing was the most scheming. She was the one who suggested it, but in the end, she blamed it on her. When Yao Jing heard this, the corners of her mouth twitched. She glanced at Yi Ying and smiled. "If you don't want to, then forget it. To think that I stood up for you. Forget it," she loved to save face. She was obviously angry, but she still had to suppress it. "If I say it's okay, then it's okay. We'll start in 2 minutes. Go sit at the side." Luo Ran's family owned a furniture factory. His family had some money. He was interested in Ying, so he wanted to show off. He patted his chest and made the decision. Ying frowned and looked at Yang Heng. She did not want to offend Yao Jing, so she could only ask him for help. "Luo Ran, don't mess around. Just play basketball. Don't make trouble." Yang Heng, who was playing with a ball, saw this and said lightly. He told Ying and the rest to go back to their seats. The whistle had already been blown. Yang Heng's gaze swept across the stage. There was a flicker of light in his eyes. So the girl he saw at the traffic station that night was her. At the beginning of the game, the girls screamed the loudest. The provincial number 1 middle school was developing well in sports, and the students' enthusiasm for sports was also much higher. Yi Jian was probably the calmest. Listening to the deafening cheers and watching the vigorous figures on the field, there was only a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. After watching for about 20 minutes, Yi Qian felt a little bored. Just as Uncle Chin said, she liked the training ground in the army the most. She wanted to leave early and wait for Zhang Bin's class to score consecutively. She wanted to go to her side to cheer and share the joy with them. Yi Qian raised his hand and waved at her, then sat down again to watch. Yi Qian picked up the questions for the evening self-study session and laid them on top of the physics textbook. Amidst the noise, she calmed down and picked up a pen to start the questions. Yi Qian was definitely the first person to be able to solve the questions in this kind of situation. During the halftime break, the players of grade 12 all leaned on their side to rest, while Zhang Bin and the rest switched to the other side. Yi Jian, who was almost done with the test paper, did not notice that she was doing the last question during the halftime break. Her roommate, Li Qian, was the first to return to his seat. He noticed Yi Jian, who was engrossed in doing the questions. He then looked at her completed test paper and sighed. Yi Jian, you're so smart and hardworking. After writing down the final analysis process, Yi Jian pressed down on the spring ballpoint pen and looked up with a smile. You don't have to admire me. I just don't like watching football matches, but I was too embarrassed to leave early. I did the test paper because I was bored. She looked at the backs of the other four who had yet to sit down. And Jiasin was still shouting at the top of her lungs. She couldn't help but laugh. She's so crazy. I suspect she'll rush down. Yang Heng and the rest are here. They're resting in front of us now. It would be strange if they weren't crazy. Li Qian was very quiet. His grades were below average. When he spoke, he was gentle. Occasionally, he would reveal a shy smile. Because he was on the chubby side, he didn't always hang out with Jiasin. Instead, he liked to hang out with Yi Qian and humbly ask questions that he didn't understand. Then, she picked up the textbook that she would bring to the self-study session later and lowered her head to read. Chapter 445. Yi Qian didn't disturb her. Instead, he tidied up his textbook. He would read it seriously later. Watching basketball games was also part of high school life. Yi Qian, Yi Qian. And Jiasin, whose face was red from shouting, turned her head and saw that Yi Qian, who was standing beside her, had already sat down. She quickly sat down and said happily, "He's really handsome. If Ying didn't know him, I would have chased after him." The other three girls from the same dormitory also sat down. Just shouting, "Do your best," made them sweat profusely. When the three of them sat down, the resting third-year players immediately saw Yi Qian. Yi Qian was talking to Jiasin with a smile on his face. Feeling that someone was watching him, he raised his head and looked over coldly. He saw a boy wearing an old silver necklace staring at him. Her brows furrowed slightly. Her originally calm gaze suddenly turned sharp because of the boy's impudent gaze. When she looked directly at the boy, her originally elegant gaze suddenly gave off an extremely cold and oppressive feeling. Suddenly, the boy was so scared that he took a few steps back. Luo ran, "There's still the second half. You can't let your legs go soft." The boys who didn't notice saw him take a few steps back and looked like he was about to fall. They all laughed out loud. Yang Heng, on the other hand, glanced at the stage and saw a sea of black heads. "Fuck you, I just slipped." Luo Ran, who was trying to be brave, would never admit that he was scared by Yi Qian's gaze. Although he was cursing in his heart, he didn't want to admit defeat. He straightened his neck and said, "I haven't had my fill yet. Today, I'll definitely beat this group of second-year students." Yang Heng threw the empty mineral water bottle aside and sneered at Luo Ran. "Luo Ran, don't stand up for others. Be careful that you don't even know how you died." During this period of time, the Transportation Bureau was secretly investigating the girl who helped the criminal police solve the case that night. He had seen her before. When 2 police officers led her and another man into the Transportation Bureau, he was just coming out of his office. The next day, his father warned him not to mention that he had seen the girl outside. She had almost forgotten about it, but after having dinner in the cafeteria today, Yao Jing suddenly remembered it. Luo Ran wanted to stand up for Ying, but his head was caught by the door. Just play around for a bit, and you really want to stand out. Do you think that school is a society? In the second half, Grade 12 Class wanted to win while Grade 12 Class 2 wanted to tie. It was even more intense than the first half. The entire basketball court was about to be lifted by the screams. Yi Qian felt his eardrums hurt. Come on. Come on. Good luck, Grade 12 Class 12. Yang Heng. Yang Heng. Do your best. The only uniform shouts in the audience were either cheering for Yi Jian or cheering for Yang Heng. Yi Jian, who was used to hearing uniform cheers, felt like she was in a magic spell. She decided that she would never come to watch any competitions again in the future, unless she was asked to. Li Qian didn't really want to watch anymore, so he whispered into Yi Qian's ear, "Why don't we go back to the classroom? I feel a little dizzy hearing this. The competition is about to end. If we don't leave early, it will be quite crowded later." His words touched Yi Qian's heart. He said to Enjussin, who was so excited that it was as if she was playing the game herself, "Look, I'm going back to the classroom with Li Qian." Enjussin only reacted after he said it a few times. The competition is about to end. You're leaving now. Why don't? As she spoke, a black shadow suddenly came from below the stage. The students sitting in the front row were shocked and instinctively dodged to the side. Chapter 446. A few screams were drowned out by the cheers. The ball, which was supposed to go in, was snatched away by someone. It lost its aim and flew towards the audience. The students who saw it all knew to hide, while the students who noticed the situation all looked over. They didn't know who was the unlucky one to be hit by the basketball. It had happened before. Their faces were covered in blood. It was too horrible to look at. Yi Ying, who was sitting to Yi Qian's right, could see the situation. She subconsciously gripped the corner of her skirt and stared at Yi Qian. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised. She didn't need to do it herself. There would always be someone who would teach Yi Qian a lesson for her. This was what her father said, only the right person can use it. Yao Jing, who was sitting next to her, glanced at her. There was a faint coldness in her eyes. Yang Heng liked girls like her. Girls who could be killed with one slap. Were they that good? Yi Qian felt that she was indeed a basketball player. Her aim was quite accurate. The ball flew directly towards her face. If her entire face was hit, she wouldn't be able to face anyone tomorrow. Yi Qian, who had already stood up, caught the ball directly towards her face with both hands. Under the gaze of the surrounding students, the corners of her mouth curved into a slight smile. She weighed the ball in her hands in front of her opponent's stunned gaze. She definitely had to return this ball. Otherwise, how could she compete? This ball isn't very obedient. You should change it. As Yi Jian spoke, her eyes were bright and clear like the moonlight. They seemed clear, yet they were actually hazy, and they were separated by a layer of mist that couldn't be seen through no matter what. Her features were beautiful like water, and they were extremely elegant. But even if she wasn't elegant, her smile was a little cold. At first glance, it looked like a blooming flower. But if you looked closely, you would realize that it was actually a sharp sword. In Luo Ran's eyes, Yi Qian's smile was like a sword hanging over his head, about to fall. He couldn't help but take a step back. Unexpectedly, Zhang Bin, who was standing behind him, blocked him. He heard Zhang Bin angrily ask behind him, "Luo Ran, whose face did you hit with the ball just now?" "Whose face could I have hit?" Luo Ran roared. He used the volume of his voice to prove his innocence. "Who the fuck can control this kind of thing? Do you think I want to? Fuck. Don't you know how to talk?" Boys were not good at quarreling. When they quarreled, they would settle it with their fists. Seeing that Zhang Bin was about to throw a punch, Yi Qian quickly raised her voice to stop him. She smiled and said, "Hey, the senior wearing the number 16 jersey, I know you were careless. I didn't blame you. Why are you angry? Catch!" As she spoke, she swatted the ball in her hand, as though she was playing a volleyball. Volleyball is so soft. 2. From the shock by the flying ball. By Yi. You. Does it hurt? And Jiaxin asked blankly. The entire basketball court. It was a little quiet. Yi Qian looked at her sideways and smiled. "I'm not in pain. It's that guy who's in pain. I have to go down and apologize. After all, I slapped his nose full of blood." Yi Qian used both hands to support himself on the railing that separated the audience from the court. With a light leap, he flipped over the railing that was 1.5 meters high and walked in front of Luo Ran, who was looking up to stop the bleeding. "I'm sorry, senior. I'm a volleyball player. My hands are strong. When I got the ball, I unconsciously used it as a volleyball. I'm also standing high. I didn't expect it to hit your face. I'm sorry." She had hit his face with the ball. She had to apologize. Chapter 447. Yi Qian would never allow herself to be taken advantage of. If the other party had really been careless, she would have laughed it off. But the other party was obviously not. Since the ball was aimed at her, there was no grudge between them, and they didn't even know each other before this. Only Yi Ying had been on the court. If this had something to do with Yi Ying, then sorry, she would return the favor the way you hit her. Yang Heng took a towel filled with ice water and placed it on Luo Ran's nose. Looking at the, obediently apologizing, beautiful Yi Qian, he pursed his lips and said loudly, "It's okay, you can go back to your seat." When Yi Qian raised the basketball, Yang Heng felt something was wrong, but he never expected that the power of the shot would be so great. It made Luo Ran's nose bleed. Also, he couldn't cause trouble for her. After all, Luo Ran was the one who hit her first. The other party was just giving him a taste of his own medicine. He didn't even have the right to ask for an explanation. His answer made Yi Qian raise his eyebrows slightly. Could it be that he didn't know her? Or that Yi Ying didn't mention her to him? Both were possible. Yi Ying now wished that everyone didn't know her and didn't go against her openly. Compared to junior high, she was much more experienced. "Then I won't disturb your game. Sorry." Yi Qian apologized politely again. He didn't return to the spectator seats. Instead, he gestured for Li Qian, who was dumbfounded, to take her book and return to the classroom together. Luo Ran was hit by the basketball. Not only did his nose bleed, but his entire brain was buzzing. He was seriously injured. After using the towel filled with ice water to apply to his face, he heard Yi Qian's apology and left. He was like a little tyrant at home, so how could he let Yi Qian go so easily? He pushed away the man who was supporting him and stood with the towel in his hand. He glared at him fiercely. "Fuck, you hit me and you want to leave. No way. Luo ran. Do you think this is your fucking house? Surprisingly, the one who was angry was none other than Yongheng. He grabbed Luo Ran's arm and warned him in a low voice, Luo Ran, don't fucking throw a tantrum here. You know what you've done. Who can you blame? A girl playing volleyball hit the ball over and you didn't catch it. You blew all over your face, and you still have the face to shout. Yi Qian had already stopped. She was waiting for Luo Ran to say, no way. After hearing Yongheng's words, she narrowed her eyes. Why did it feel like Yongheng was avoiding her? Junior, you should go back. He's just being silly. We'll explain when the teacher comes. Yongheng was indeed avoiding Yi Qian. He did not want Yi Qian to notice them. A group of students who pretend to be obedient in school but are no different from hooligans outside of school. This was a warm-up match organized by the students themselves and supervised by the student union. The teacher stayed in the first half of the match and only left in the second half. As soon as she left, she received news that a student had been hit in the face by a basketball and had a nosebleed, and it was a girl in the audience who was returning the basketball and had accidentally hit him in the head. This was the first time the teacher had heard of such a thing. Yi Qian brushed past the school doctor and the teacher, then met up with Enjun, Li Qian, and the others outside. When they saw her coming out, they all gathered around her, their faces full of admiration. Chapter 448. The 5 people in the dormitory looked at Yi Qian with stars in their eyes. One hit of the basketball and someone's face was covered in blood. How valiant! Li Qian was about to take Yi Qian's textbook over when he saw her outstretched hand. He asked softly, You. Does it hurt? It hurts quite a bit, right? Do you want to go back to the dormitory to get some hot water? It hurts. After all, it was a basketball and not a volleyball. It's all right. I didn't have any other thoughts when I hit it. I just wanted to return the ball. I didn't expect to make someone bleed. Yi Qian explained with a smile. She took the textbook and saw Yi Ying and the other girl walking over with dark expressions. At that time, the sky was already slightly dark, and the street lamps were already lit. The dim yellow light left on the 2 faces, as if there was a layer of dirt that could not be scraped off. It made the 2 faces look gloomy, revealing a sense of hostility. The basketball court was in a corner of the school and there weren't many street lamps on both sides. Yi Qian and the other girls happened to be standing in the dark. Yi Ying and Yao Jing, who walked out, were both preoccupied and didn't notice. I didn't expect your sister to be so capable. Yi Ying, why didn't you remind me in advance? Yao Jing walked quickly. Compared to Yi Ying, who had caught up, there was an additional layer of frustration in her eyes. Why couldn't she handle such a small matter well? In the end, Yongheng had to clean up the mess. Yi Ying was furious when she heard this. She caused this trouble and now she didn't remind her. What did she remind her of? She clearly didn't agree to do this on the court. Why didn't I remind you? I didn't agree at that time. Yongheng didn't agree either. Yi Ying indeed gave in to Yao Jing, but today on the court, she couldn't do so. Yao Jing would take a mile after taking an inch. Hearing this, Yao Jing stopped and turned to glare at her. She sneered. Ha, you mean it's all my fault now? Am I wrong? I'm just standing up for you. You were the one who told us that your sister bullied you. If you didn't say it, would I stand up for you? In short, the fault was all on others. It had nothing to do with her. Even if she was wrong, she had thousands of reasons to explain herself. In the end, it was still someone else's fault. If others didn't do anything, she wouldn't do anything. If she wouldn't. It was a formula to find excuses for herself. Ying had always been a meticulous person. She vaguely felt that there was something wrong with Yao Jing's attitude toward her, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong. A dark light flashed in her eyes, and she carefully probed, "Don't you know Yang Heng the best? Would he have agreed to such things in the past?" Yao Jing was still in a fit of anger, so she let Ying sound out a little. "I went to the same school as him since we were young. He's never liked to do such things, so it's normal for him to stop it." Suddenly, Yi Jianjian understood why Yao Jing had been treating her differently. It turned out that she liked Yang Heng. She pursed her lips and smiled. "Look at you. You know him so well, but you still said those words to Luo Ran in front of him. How about this? When Yang Heng comes out later, I'll explain to him that I was looking for you and wanted Luo Ran to stand up for me. You should have been like this back then." Yao Jing glanced at her and her mood instantly improved. She held Yi Ying's arm and lifted her chin slightly. "I knew you were the best. Don't worry, you're so good. Yang Heng will definitely write you a love letter soon." Chapter 449. If Yang Heng really wrote a love letter, Yi Ying would be in trouble. Yi Ying cursed in her heart, but she said, "Don't tease me. How could Yang Heng write a love letter to me? I got to know him because of you. In the future." As she spoke, she saw Yi Qian and her classmates standing not far away. This meant that they might have overheard her conversation with Yao Jing. It didn't matter if Yi Qian heard it, but her classmates couldn't. "I have something to discuss with Ying. Jiasin, you guys go back to the classroom first." Yi Qian glanced coldly at the two people who had already seen him. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Yi Jifan must have told Ying not to cause trouble for her in school, but Ying came looking for her. Since she came looking for her, how could she avoid it? Coincidentally, she also wanted to know who the guy who had a bloody nose was. "I'll stay. Li Qian, you three go back to the classroom." And Jiasin rejected. She was afraid that Yi Qian would be at a disadvantage. "You didn't interact with Yi Ying for a year in high school. Now, she only knows people from families with some status. Don't think that I'm staying because I'm afraid of her." After all, Li Qian and the other two had only known each other for a month. Unlike in Jiasin, they whispered, "Be careful." Then, they left. Once the three of them left, Yi Qian smiled and said, "Are you really going to cause trouble with me?" "No need. You can just stand by my side and watch. Let's listen to what they have to say first." Yao Jing, who had also recognized him, narrowed her eyes. She grabbed Yi Ying's arm and walked over with a half-smile. "You're Yi Qian, right? You made a senior in high school bleed with a basketball. How impressive. Do you know who you're hitting?" She had a gloating expression on her face. Her smile was also full of interest. "It's Luo Ran, the most troublesome student in school. He's good at fighting, drinking, and smoking. You hit him, you'll be blocked after school." Now that he thought about it, it seemed that he had helped Ying vent her anger. After he finished speaking, he smiled at Ying and said, "We didn't hit her with the ball today, but she was courting death by hitting Luo Ran. We still managed to vent our anger." Ying knew that Yao Jing's heart was at ease now that Yang Heng's matter was brought up. She smiled and said, "I'm afraid my sister doesn't know Luo Ran yet. I have to introduce him to her. What's there to say? I'm just waiting to be blocked after school." Feeling comforted, Yao Jing intimately leaned against Ying and smiled sweetly. "Ying, if you get bullied in the future, it's not wrong to look for Luo Ran." It turned out that the boy who was beaten up by him was called Luo Ran. Would he stop him after school? Yi Qian thought about it. It had been a long time since he had been blocked. Raising his eyebrows, he smiled faintly and said, "All right, I'll wait to be blocked." Didn't he often get blocked in the past? So what if he was blocked by a few students? In the past, He Jiamin, Tan Wei, and Xie Sifeng were your helpers. Now, it's changed to someone else. Why are you so timid? You don't show up yourself and always look for others. And Jiasin crossed her arms and looked at her mockingly. If you have the guts, come out yourself. Why do you always use others as your tool? Yao Jing, who had a smile on her face, heard this and her expression changed slightly. She had always known that Yi Ying was a smart person who knew her limits. However, she didn't know what kind of person she was in middle school. Her hands unconsciously wanted to loosen. She liked to play smart, but that didn't mean that she would see others play smart with her. Chapter 450. Yi Ying remained calm, as if she didn't notice Yao Jing's strange behavior. She said coldly, "Yi Qian, you said that it would be best for us to coexist peacefully in school. I didn't understand in the past, and the things I did were childish and laughable. But have I done anything to you since the 3rd year of middle school? Coexist peacefully, whether in middle school or high school, it's best if we don't quarrel or embarrass each other. What happened tonight was an accident. I couldn't control that boy's actions. He wanted to stand up for me. If you don't believe me, you can ask someone else. I did stop him, but he didn't listen." How could she not notice Yao Jing's strange behavior? Yi Ying was trying her best to make it up to her because she noticed. And she did make it up to her. Yao Jing's expression softened. Although she didn't pull her arm back, she didn't feel as intimate as before. She smiled sweetly and said, "Yi Ying, why are you talking nonsense with her? So what if she's my sister? Do you think she'll hit you?" She looked at Yi Qian and said arrogantly, "I didn't like you today, so I asked Luo Ran to do it. If you have the ability, come find me and Luo Ran. This has nothing to do with Yi Ying." Birds of a feather flocked together. Yi Qian sensed that the girl standing beside Yi Ying had her own thoughts and didn't really want to stand up for Yi Ying. Her lips curled up slightly, and her eyes flashed with mockery. Yi Qian didn't mind Yi Ying finding more friends to stand up for her, but if there was a chance for her so-called friends to cause trouble for Yi Ying, Yi Qian found it quite interesting. As her eyes moved, a cold smile appeared in her star-like eyes. She slowly opened her mouth and said, "You can't stand the sight of a student you don't know, so you asked someone to attack her. If it wasn't for Yi Ying, would you do this?" The distance between the girl and Yi Ying widened again. Just now, they were shoulder to shoulder, but now there was a gap of a fist between them. She glanced at Yi Ying, who still wanted to destroy the piece in front of her, and said with a smile, "So, whether or not tonight's incident has nothing to do with you, Yi Ying, you know what you did. I also know that you know many classmates from good families in high school, but if you want to use them to make trouble for me, Yi Ying, then you're wrong. Firstly, I won't be afraid. Secondly, the school is the school after all. If you guys go overboard, the school will come forward and invite the parents. I believe that the one who will end up embarrassed won't be me. Number 3, don't forget that there is only one way to deal with students who cause trouble: expel them. Even the student records will be cancelled." Yi Ying still had a smile on her face, but when she heard the last part, her heart skipped a beat. She instinctively looked at Yao Jing, who was beside her. When she saw that Yao Jing was expressionless, she glared at Yi Qian and said sternly, "Yi Qian, how dare you threaten me?" Just as she said, once her family found out that they were causing trouble at school, they would definitely not tolerate it. Threat. These are the school rules. Didn't you read the school rules? Yi Qian laughed. All of them were just trying to intimidate others. In the end, they still had to rely on their parents. Yi Ying, if you want to cause trouble for me in high school, be careful that you don't implicate your friends. They won't be able to get into university. When he said that, Yao Jing and Yi Ying's expressions changed. While they were talking, the game had already ended. The spectating students began to walk out. From a few people to groups, the quiet stadium instantly became lively. Chapter 451. Yao Jing took the opportunity to withdraw her hand from Yi Ying's arm. She studied Yi Qian for a while before saying, "You're right. Yi Ying and I would never violate the school rules. Naturally, we won't find trouble with you. But..." She pointed at the boys in their jerseys and smiled, "Naturally, someone will find trouble with you." This Yi Qian was indeed smart and knew how to talk. He never faced her directly and only targeted Yi Ying. Yang Heng had said to never find trouble with a smart person who could distinguish between the severity of the matter. Thinking of Yang Heng's words, Yao Jing had no intention of standing up again. Yi Qian only raised his eyebrows and smiled at Yao Jing's threat. "I don't know any of you. I only know Yi Ying. If you dare to take the risk of being expelled to stand up for her, I can only say that Yi Ying has made the right friends. Classroom, cafeteria, platoon, such a simple life. If Luo Ran had the guts to bring people into the school and the platoon, she would definitely respect him as a man." Her indifference made Yao Jing's eyes darken, not because of Yi Qian's words, but because she knew that Yi Qian had seen through her intentions. Because she would never stand up for Yi Ying. Without another word, she ignored Yi Ying and walked away with a cold face. This time, Yi Ying did not chase after her immediately. She looked at Yao Jing's back and sneered in her heart. Sooner or later, she would make Yao Jing not dare to treat her like this again. But facing Yi Qian, she refused to admit defeat. She lifted her chin and smiled proudly, "You're right. I have made a group of good friends. All of them are willing to stand up for me. Yi Qian, what about you? Who will stand up for you? If you go against me, just wait for them to teach you a lesson. Luo Ran is not a good student. Just wait and see." Yi Qian was too lazy to say anything more. Yi Ying's intelligence was too narrow. Even her judgment was the same. And Jessen, who had been holding it in for a long time, couldn't hold it in anymore. She laughed out loud. She could tell something was amiss, but Yi Ying was still pretending. How could she not want to laugh? "We'll wait and see. Yi Ying, hurry up and complain to Luo Ran. After all, the unlucky ones won't be me and Yi Qian." With that, she raised her arm, which had been tightly linked with Yi Qian's, and laughed. "What are friends? Friends should never leave each other, you know that." It was so piercing that Yi Ying's eyes suddenly became sharp, and her face turned pale from anger. She gritted her teeth and said hatefully, "Is that so? Let's see how long you can be proud of yourselves." He didn't stay any longer and left aggressively. Yi Qian smiled coolly. Then, with a serious expression, he said to Jessen, "Don't leave school so easily. I'll take care of Luo Ran's matters." He didn't confront Yao Jing directly just now. Instead, he only mentioned Yi Ying time and time again because he wanted to let her know that the matter between him and Yi Ying had nothing to do with friends. It had nothing to do with Jessen, who was standing beside him. "Don't worry about me. But you have to be careful. Luo Ran is indeed not a person to be trifled with." And Jessen lowered her head and rubbed her forehead against Yi Qian's shoulder. "Zhangbin told me that I must listen to you and can't make my own decisions. Don't worry, I'm not a day student. I won't leave school." Even so, Yi Qian still secretly kept an eye on things for the next few days. He found that Luo Ran didn't make any moves, and Ying also didn't make any moves. But the more it was like this, the more uneasy Yi Qian felt. Chapter 452. On Friday afternoon, Yi Qian went directly to the army for training. As soon as she walked out of the school gate, she felt a few malicious gazes coming from different directions. This made Yi Qian feel more at ease. At least, she knew that Luo Ran had not given up and was looking for an opportunity. Yi Qian walked forward with light steps with a slight smile in her eyes. Usually, she would leave at night for training. Since Luo Ran did not know, no one would come looking for trouble. However, on Friday, they only had to ask Ying to know that she would leave the school. The army's car was parked about 500 meters away from the school. Yi Qian walked quickly in her school uniform. She was agile and knew how to avoid being followed. It only took her 2 minutes to shake them off. What? She's gone. Luo Ran, who was sitting in the canteen and drinking a soda, jumped up and glared at the students from other schools. None of you followed her. Fuck. Outside, there were a few young men from the underworld who were close to Luo Ran. Hearing this, one of the young men with yellow hair on his forehead walked in while chewing on a betel nut. I told you to let us do it, but you didn't believe me and insisted on finding a few students. Isn't it normal that things didn't work out? How about this, we'll deal with it for you. Look at your nose. It's been a week and it's still bruised. How can you take it lying down? Clang. A soda bottle cap was pried open. Yang Heng, who was leaning against the counter, said to Luo Ran, whose face had turned ashen, I don't have any opinion if you want to make the trouble bigger, but to let outsiders bully your own female classmates, Luo Ran, I look down on your guts. He took out a $50 note from his shirt and put it on the counter. He said to the canteen owner, give them a soda bottle each to calm down. He picked up his bag and walked out leisurely, leaving Luo Ran alone with a pale face. He slammed his fist on the counter. After thinking for a while, he grabbed his bag and chased after him. The young man with yellow hair looked at the $50 note on the counter and then looked at the boy who walked out first. He whistled and said to his friends, so he's also a rich student. The few young men standing outside all laughed when they saw this. What are you laughing at? Go and find out where that boy is active. Luo Ran's family has been strict recently, and money is tight. We brothers need to find another family. The yellow-haired youth held the 50 yuan between his fingers and said to the quiet shop owner, 3 packs of cigarettes and as many bottles of soda as you have left. There were only a few days left until National Day. The tiger of autumn was still showing its prowess. It was so hot that everyone wanted to drink a mouthful of ice. The soldiers all brought their own kettles. They didn't drink ice water, but tea with honeysuckle added in a large stainless steel bucket. They could drink as much as they wanted. After a bucket was placed on the training ground, it didn't take long for them to see the bottom. The basement was cool, but after a training session, it was still hot enough to make one sweat. When Yi Qian arrived at the underground training ground, he saw that all the car soldiers were packing up. They looked like they were about to leave. Why are you all packing up? You're not practicing tonight? She asked the soldier who drove her here in surprise. Didn't you say that we'll be practicing every night until the end of December? The car soldier who picked her up pursed his lips and smiled shyly. The political commissar is here. Do you want to ask the political commissar? Political Commissar Yen was waiting for Yi Qian to come over. He signaled the car soldier to go about his business and smiled warmly. There's a special mission tonight. You've been practicing for almost a month. We've all seen your results. We all agree that you've improved very quickly. Chapter 453. Right now, you only have one night training course that you haven't started yet. I discussed it with Commander Liu, and we will start tonight. You will drive a car and be accompanied by your instructor. You will depart from your province for cross-province training. Yi Qian was stunned for a few seconds. After hearing this, he said in disbelief, "Political Commissar, I don't even have a driver's license." He was worried that he didn't have a driver's license, not that he couldn't do it. Don't worry about that. We have our own arrangements. Go and see the car you will be driving tonight. The instructor is doing maintenance for you. Political Commissar Yan admired Yi Qian's confidence in himself. It wasn't arrogance, but a down-to-earth confidence. He wasn't exaggerating, nor was he overly modest. Yi Qian immediately had no more worries after hearing this. He responded crisply and walked towards the parking lot. At 11 p.m., the surroundings were cleaned up. After all the preparations were done, jeeps drove out of the underground parking lot one after another. They drove to the side of the road in an orderly manner before turning on their headlights and driving into the mountains. All the cars were jeeps instead of armored vehicles. From the outside, they looked no different from the jeeps in the city. Yi Qian followed in the middle of the convoy and began the night training that would last until Sunday. She would only be back on Sunday. At 3 a.m., Political Commissar Yan's voice came from the walkie-talkie. He asked the instructor accompanying Yi Qian, "How's the situation on your side?" Reporting, "Everything is normal." The instructor, who also didn't sleep, kept his mind awake and reported the situation of their car. "Change at 4 a.m., the co-driver will take over." The co-driver was the instructor himself. At this time, they were already on the mountain road. The long mountain road seemed to spiral into the sky. The headlights shone in front of them. On one side was the vast mountain range, and on the other side was an unprotected cliff. The entire mountain road was bumpy and uneven. Yi Qian's whole body was shaking. There wasn't a single minute of silence. After making a 180-degree turn, they continued to climb up. One moment, they would make a 180-degree turn inward, and the next moment, they would make a 180-degree turn outward. They continued to drive forward until the co-driver took over. Yi Qian had already completed the 4 stages of basic driving, practical driving, long-distance driving, and graduation assessment. At 5:00 in the morning, all the motorcades stopped by the roadside. After resting for half an hour in the wilderness, they continued to move forward. At 6 o'clock, the motorcade no longer followed the mountain road. Instead, they turned into another section of the mountain. "Attention all vehicles, attention all vehicles. We will arrive at the simulated battlefield in half an hour. All vehicles, please prepare for battle." Even though it was Yi Qian's first time driving at night, she knew what the tests were. When the car turned out of the mountain road and headed into the mountains, she knew that they had arrived at the test area. There were a total of more than 10 simulated battlefields. The simulations here covered almost all the common situations that one would suddenly encounter while driving. The artillery blockade was the first simulated section. Amidst the sounds of explosions, Yi Qian drove through it. Flames rose in front of her eyes. She could feel the firepower even from inside the car. The steering wheel turned so fast that her hands turned into afterimages. After dashing out of the car, they arrived at the bullet hole road. The car was bumpy, and the body was shaking. Like a newborn calf who was not afraid of tigers, Yi Qian courageously trained with the male soldiers on this completely unfamiliar training ground that was set up based on the terrain of the wilderness. There were dozens of wartime courses, and Yi Qian couldn't miss a single one. Under the conditions that were similar to actual combat, she trained her driving skills. This was also a foundation that no one could surpass when she officially wore the military uniform in the future. Chapter 454. After the assessment, the entire mountain was filled with thick smoke. When the walkie-talkie said, "Over," even the strong-willed Yi Qian slumped over the steering wheel after the car came to a stop. The instructor sitting in the front passenger seat laughed when he saw this. He joked, "So you can get tired too. Some time ago, all of us male soldiers were shocked by you. Every one of us trained with all our might, afraid that we would be outdone by a girl who hasn't even graduated from high school. Many of the male soldiers were left in the dust by this young lady." As soldiers who were about to enter Zongnanhai, they felt disgruntled when they saw the intensity of her training. Platoon Commander Liu and the political commissar had arranged for them to be her instructors. The pressure was immense. Now that they saw her slumped over the steering wheel in exhaustion, it was really a first for them. They couldn't help but make fun of her for a moment. "Instructor, don't make fun of me. We were almost burned to ashes by the artillery just now," Yi Qian said in a low voice. He wasn't afraid, but he was shocked. It was even more shocking than the gunfight in Australia. No wonder Platoon Commander Liu and the political commissar insisted that she take part in a night drive. It was obvious that they wanted her to participate in actual combat. They wanted her to experience the dangers of war. While she was shocked, she also understood why a country needed a strong military. Only a strong military could prevent you from being homeless, from being caught in the flames of war, and from having your family destroyed. The instructor sitting in the front passenger seat was also panting. When he heard this, he laughed heartily. "Yi Qian, this is nothing. It's just a small-scale, team-based simulation of actual combat. It's only for our group of people." It was just a small-scale simulation of actual combat, but it made Yi Qian truly feel what war was like. It could destroy heaven and earth. It could destroy all families, countries, and lives. It was a real feeling. It was a shock that went straight to the heart. It was as if she had walked into a circle of death and come into close contact with the Grim Reaper. This was Yi Qian's first time taking part in actual combat training. Even though it was just a small-scale simulation of 20 people, it was so real that it shook her to the core. Compared to the gunfights she had experienced in Australia, the shock the artillery gave her was directly smashed into her heart. Just a small simulated battle had such a huge threat. The soldiers who were not afraid of sacrificing themselves on the battlefield faced death directly. Facing the smoke and gunfire of war, they bravely defended their country with their iron-blooded bodies. They were the most admirable people of this era. With her hand pressed against her chest, Yi Jian, who felt her heart palpitate, gently closed her eyes. There was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. No matter how fierce the artillery fire was or how dense the bullets were, she would walk in this direction step by step. She would not look back, and she would not regret it. Yi Qian, whose mental state had improved once again, exhaled a mouthful of foul air. Just as she was about to get up, the instructor gently patted her back and said with a smile, "Take a break. Calm down. Actually, ours is not bad. Take the brigade that specializes in training military driving teams for example. The technical soldiers there are really well trained. Other than learning how to drive sedans and flat-top firewood transport vehicles, many of them also learn how to drive artillery tractors, heavy transport vehicles, and other special vehicles. Their training is strict and rigorous, and they have more actual combat experience than us. Every single one of them has godlike driving skills." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.